before they head into the meeting to get the final predictions from those who have been working the numbers for Turnbull and those who have been working the numbers for Tony Abbott. Look, both sides are predicting a fairly close result here. I think if there's more confidence on one side, it probably is on the Turnbull camp. We'll get the predictions of everyone else shortly. We haven't heard, though, have we, over the last 5 hours from Julie Bishop. We have had Scott Morrison confirm that, yes, he's backing Tony Abbott tonight, but not seeking the deputy leadership, so not willing to stand as deputy leader for him. But Julie Bishop's silence tonight, I think, has been quite intriguing. Yeah. No doubt, having gone in and delivered the message to Tony Abbott that he should call a spill indicates that he, as Kelly O'Dwyer going in from Victoria, that he doesn't, that she doesn't think he should stay. But the fact she hasn't gone public, or indeed a number of senior cabinet ministers who we know are supporting Malcolm Turnbull, the fact they haven't gone public with that information, I think has been quite telling.
It is telling. There's no way Julie Bishop, it's untenable for her to serve as deputy leader to Tony Abbott in the event that Tony Abbott gets across the line. It just can't happen. My advice is from some of her colleagues is that she won't serve as deputy. It would be a very, very awkward relationship if that was to be the case. Possibly there could be an argument made if they're going to have a process of healing that they keep her as foreign minister, given just how effective she's been in that job. I think a very telling bit of advice that we have is that Morrison has said he won't serve as deputy to Tony Abbott. I think if he said he was willing to serve as deputy, that might have brought even more votes over to the Prime Minister. The fact that he said he'll vote for Tony Abbott but won't serve as deputy, I think, is going to have an important impact tonight. Just how significant we'll know within the half hour. If
Tony Abbott wins tonight, you've got the prospect of Malcolm Turnbull sitting on the back bench and possibly Julie Bishop, and we don't know, sitting on the back bench as well. You know, yes, there's going to be a problem there for the government, a big problem, and a close result itself means a big problem for Tony Abbott in trying to end all of this. Look, I'm sure whatever happens, in about an hour, we will hear, whoever the winner is and his supporters saying we need to unify. This is the end of it. Really, the end of it is a clear result. There's Andrew Robb walking in solo as well. We haven't heard from him either as to which way he's going. But Michael Kroger, let me get your prediction first on this. We're 10 minutes away from the party room starting. You aren't saying, and rightly, I suppose, given you are a Liberal Party official, the president in Victoria, who you think will or should win. But you were saying about an hour ago you do expect it to be more emphatic than just a close result. Is that still your view?
Look, it is. Let's be frank about this. Leaders have to win by more than a few. When Malcolm Fraser beat Andrew Peacock many years ago, it was 54-27, 2-1. So when Bob Hawke beat Paul Keating in 91 in May or early June, he won 66-44. So that's 60-40. Fraser won 66-33. So a leader needs to historically win by more than a few. So if Tony wins tonight, I hope he gets 60, 63, 64, 65 votes to Malcolm mid-30s. If Malcolm wins, historically, challengers only need to win by a few, and that's because if a leader wins narrowly, it's very clear you've got a Gorton McMahon situation where if a leader wins by 1 or 2, it's very clear the party room's split. So if the PM wins, I hope he wins decisively tonight. As I said earlier on, I think the big issue during the day has been that Julie Bishop having signalled to her colleagues that she feels that there needs to be a change. That may well be a decisive factor tonight. It may not be the decisive factor, but it'll be an important factor. But either way, Liberal Party members will support whoever the leader is. We've been through leadership challenges all our lives, so we're used to them. My friend Peter Eath was in a few. Richo was even in a few famous ones. So, and as I said earlier on, the public know these things happen. I mean, this is politics. They're not. There's shock horror. There's a leadership challenge. Yep. Big deal.
Well, I don't know. I think I'm sure many do think it's a bigger deal when a Prime Minister is potentially being brought down. We can talk about that if that does indeed happen over the coming hour. But Paul Murray, we're in your time slot, and I'm sure this is why the party room meeting was delayed until now, so that would be during your show. Let me get your prediction on what you think is going to happen in the coming half hour or so.
The best that I can say is of all of those counting the numbers on the behalf of the Prime Minister, the best case scenario they can put to me is that it is 54 votes is what the Prime Minister will get. That's the best case scenario. It would be enough to win, in my view, and most importantly is that this is an embarrassing night for the country. I don't think that these are moments that the general public enjoy. I know that the people walking in there who are about to vote to get rid of a Prime Minister potentially don't enjoy, but I do think it important at the moment of history where a decision is made about who runs our country, that the people mean so little, and about the preservation of those who are in that room to save their own backside frustrates an awful lot of people. So in my view, the best case scenario for Tony Abbott is that he wins, and he wins by a bees.
All right, and 54 is, I think, an interesting number. I'll give you my prediction in a moment, but I just want to whip around everyone before this starts as to which way they think it's going to go. We saw Chris Pine walk in too, I should point out, with a bit of a smile on his face for the cameras there, and some other figures as well of the Liberal Party. Peter Van Onselen, what's your view, what's your prediction on what sort of outcome we're going to see? I
am very firmly predicting 54-45 in favour of Malcolm Turnbull.
All right, that's pretty clear then. 54-45 for Turnbull. Graham Richardson, what do you think?
I think that'll be pretty close. I think Turnbull will win by enough. It's not going to be a slaughter, and it probably was going to be earlier on. As I said, some backbenchers I think have gone back to him, but I still think it's going to be a pretty decisive victory.
All right, and I mean, you were saying the 60-40 sort of result earlier. Maybe not that many, but that 54-45 that Peter mentions, not too far off.
Well, 51 is enough for Malcolm. Just remember that. 51's plenty.
He'll get 54.
But I think he'll probably do a bit better than that. And I hope he does. I mean, the Liberal Party do need some certainty going into their future.
I reckon they're going to break Turnbull's way here. I mean, obviously, it's hard to know. And even Minister's got no idea really, but I'm going to say 59-40, and I think that the close nature of this will lead to a number break the way of the challenger. 59-40.
Sorry. I was just going to say quickly that I do think that the tightening of this, according to the Turnbull camp, has been a deliberate ploy to ensure that they hold their numbers firm. 54-45, I think, is their worst case scenario. There comes Malcolm Turnbull down the corridor. Mitch Fifield, as predicted, one of the members of the leadership group, right next to him. Not surprisingly, Arthur Sinodinos behind him.
And Mal Brough, who was brought back into the parliament by Tony Abbott.
Scott Ryan, a major power broker out of Victoria, he is there as well. Look at that.
Interestingly, no women.
Peter Hendy. Don't worry, there'll be a lot more women in the cabinet when he wins. I can assure you of that.
Yeah, I think so. And look, it's an interesting grouping around him. Look, these things, as I was saying earlier in relation to Scott Morrison, aren't often as choreographed as you might think, but they're all clearly strong backers of Turnbull who are walking in alongside him there.
Michael Keenan must have fallen behind that pack. I doubt he's not with them.
Now, Peter Reith, what's your
Julie Bishop walking by herself.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Julie Bishop, who we were talking about earlier, we haven't heard from over the last 5 hours or so since, well, it's longer than that, since she went to see the Prime Minister and tell him that he should go, or should call a leadership spill, we should stress. There's some differing views on exactly what was said, but she was the one who first went in and said there should be a spill. Now, there is a spill, and she's keeping a very stern face indeed as she walks into this party room meeting as a deputy leader who's now seen through Brendan Nelson, Malcolm Turnbull, Tony Abbott. Are we about to see another leadership change while Julie Bishop stays on as deputy, which is an extraordinary thing in itself. We can reflect on that a little later as well. Let's keep getting some of these predictions, though. And Kieran, yours is the most emphatic in favour of Malcolm Turnbull. I'll give you mine in a moment, but Tony and Paul Murray, the most emphatic in terms of Tony Abbott. Peter Reith, let's get your prediction.
Yeah, I think in the high 50s is most likely, but it is very hard to tell. I've been in the situation before. People are lying about the numbers left, right and centre. They're all, trying to manage the expectations. It's a game that they're playing. The only people, although, who really know for Malcolm are that group that just walked in, because I reckon 3 or 4 of those were the counters. And it wouldn't surprise me if Julie Bishop and even an Andrew Robb might have been in on it as well. So, but maybe I'm getting out of court there, but I suspect they'll have a pretty good idea of the numbers.
Janine Perrott, what do you reckon?
Look, I reckon, I heard late last week there was talk that he had the numbers. If he's got them, I cannot see nothing that's happened tonight in all those people who've put in appeals that would have swayed everyone. I'm not sure why votes would have bled away. I'm going with the 57-58. To Malcolm Turnbull.
Yeah, the 50. Yeah, all right, 57. Okay, well, for what it's worth, I'm hearing different things from different people, as is always the case. Both sides keen to talk up in more confident terms how strong their numbers are. But my best read of it at the moment is that Malcolm Turnbull will win this. Now, we'll see soon enough. My numbers, I'm going to go, well, kind of somewhere in the middle, but a clear win for Malcolm Turnbull, 56-43. Is my best read of it. You can see there now the gathering around Tony Abbott, the Prime Minister, and many of these people we've heard from over the last few hours, haven't we? Matthias Cormann, Josh Frydenberg, some of the women as well on the back bench.
So Bilson could be the deputy.
Front line surrounding Tony Abbott, and well, perhaps. You wouldn't be walking with Tony Abbott right now unless you were on side. And Bruce Bilson wasn't such a flippant suggestion I made earlier for deputy leader. We'll see where that lands. Eric Abbott's in the mix there as well, and Joe Hockey you can see in the middle of the pack. He also spoke out not only strongly in support of Tony Abbott, but I think more particularly tonight, strongly against Malcolm Turnbull and the sort of criticism he was making of their economic failures.
David Spears, I don't want to name them if you don't mind, but looking at that group, there are two people in there that the Turnbull supporters thought they had. Now, that doesn't, of course, mean that they're not going to vote for the Turnbull supporters, the fact that they're walking with the Prime Minister, but there are two people there that on the list that I was shown, they believe that they had.
Well, that goes to the point, doesn't it? Peter Reith, Graham Richardson have been making that who can you really believe in this? It's the ones who say they're not going to vote for you. All right, so the party room meeting is now about to get underway.
And so it's not going to take very long, according to the Paul's advice on the what's going to happen here. No speeches. There'll be ballots cast, and then we will hear from Scott Buchholz, the Chief Government Whip, and he'll declare the result. We know that there is a leadership ticket for the Turnbull option, and that is that we understand that Julie Bishop will be part of Turnbull's bid here, but we don't have any clear indication on who will be deputy if Tony Abbott does hold on to the leadership. But we're just a matter of moments away. Thanks for your company this evening here on Sky News, our rolling coverage of this latest Liberal leadership crisis. Let's go to Graham Richardson. Richo, you've said it was pretty predictable, the events of today. From what you've seen over the years, over many decades now, we have seen surprises in recent times as well. How likely is that, do you think, tonight?
I can't remember a surprise. I think all the leadership ballots have gone pretty much the way people thought they would. And they will, because too many people are out. Too many people are out and about telling you where they stand. And I would have thought that the big surprise would be if Tony Abbott gets anywhere near him. I think that Turnbull's always been going to win this one. I didn't think so yesterday. I didn't think so at 12 o'clock today. But when he announced and when Julie Bishop went in, you knew something big was on, and that big movement had occurred. And then when you start making phone calls, you find out it's been going on for weeks. And in the end, the big line that Turnbull has used is one no one can escape. The number of news polls in a row that they've been behind, and the fact that I think it's the last three have got an 8-point gap. That has terrified the backbench. That has caused the movement. That's why it's not a surprise in that sense. In the end, I think old Jack Lang had it right, didn't he? There's only one horse in the race you can always back, and that's self-interest. It's always trying.
But what about the scenario with Malcolm Turnbull is that this is not an untested leader. This was a leader who, yes, was against Kevin Rudd, but still, how many news polls did he win? This is somebody who, again, I always think that the heir apparent or the one who people will run to always polls a little better because they're not in the news all day.
Yeah, I think
every day.
There's definitely truth in that.
So this is a problem here. How do you think Malcolm Turnbull has potentially overcome that with his colleagues to say, hey, this is why it's different, because Shorten ain't Rudd?
Look, let's make this clear. I think Turnbull will win. David Spears, feel free to violate the conversation that we had privately earlier in the day about whether this would happen today or not. That said, here's the situation.
I will, Peter. Peter called this. Peter called this this morning that it was going to happen today, and you were very confident, but you were sworn to secrecy on it. So you were absolutely right.
You've known about these
front.
movements since February.
I wouldn't have been told if I.
That's the contempt for which he holds our viewers in.
But you know what? It meant that
Don't say that.
It meant that that plasma behind us was all good to go, and we were right here and ready. And look at how many people are right around and were warned about this well in advance. But look, here's the reality for Malcolm Turnbull. They're all in that room now. They're going to make the judgment. I think he will be the next Prime Minister. But here's the reality for him. Transaction costs, and I've been writing about this now for weeks, are a real problem. They're a much bigger problem than challengers recognise. Malcolm Turnbull will have to overcome that. What are the transaction costs? One of them is unquestionably division. One of them is animosity from people that end up getting dumped, demoted, people that just won't serve with him because of past animosities. How will the former Prime Minister, if we're all right and if Malcolm Turnbull does win, how will Tony Abbott react in the aftermath? These are all problems. And as you say, voters, everybody's not watching us. You know, it's as simple as that. A lot of people, this will still be a surprise, notwithstanding the fact that we had a spill in February. Now, Tony Abbott is unpopular, much more than Kevin Rudd was, but not as much more as people think. Yes, Labor was ahead in the two-party vote, but Kevin Rudd was deeply unpopular when he got rolled because of his backflip on climate change. How does Malcolm Turnbull manage the need to maintain a backflip on climate change? How does he manage when they all start raising Godwin Gretsch again? You name it, this stuff will get thrown at him. I think that they've made a decision, if they do go with him, that the lesser of evils is to take all the risks of the transaction costs. They might be right, but you know what? There is just as good a chance that they'll be wrong. It will be fascinating to watch. The biggest weapon, whether it's Tony Abbott that comes out of there, although I don't see how, or more likely if it's Malcolm Turnbull, the absolute biggest weapon that Malcolm Turnbull has going for him against all those transaction costs, David Spears, is Bill Shorten.
Correct.
Well, I think that's right. I think that's right. And look, will Malcolm Turnbull be able to do a better job against Bill Shorten than Tony Abbott? Would Tony Abbott do better with more clear air in taking it up to Bill Shorten? I mean, next year, when we do have a Labor leader having to put out more detailed policy that can be attacked by the coalition government, I think whoever is in the leadership will be able to do a more effective job than they have against someone who really hasn't taken so many positions, despite this being the year of big ideas. So look,
but if you look at what the opposition wants tonight, and that is for Tony Abbott to retain the leadership. That's the bottom line. If you're the Labor Party, you want Tony Abbott to retain the leadership, and probably quite emphatically, because they would rather go against Tony Abbott next year than Malcolm Turnbull, no doubt.
Known quantity of Tony Abbott. There's the unknown quantity of what Malcolm Turnbull would be like as Prime Minister. And, you know, yes, you can point back to his time as Liberal leader, which wasn't fantastic, but they were in opposition. Has he learnt from that? Would he be? You don't know. There's an unknown factor about Malcolm Turnbull, and that in politics is important. And that's why Labor would be nervous, understandably, about any change. And particularly, I think, too, about Scott Morrison coming in as Treasurer, if that happens tonight.
Indeed. And Scott Morrison has played this very, very cautiously, cleverly. He hasn't been out in front of a microphone this evening. In fact, Greg Hunt, if we went through the cabinet again, that those ministers that have not been out this evening, Julie Bishop, Greg Hunt, Attorney General George Brandis,
Andrew Robb, Chris Pine, Bruce Bilson.
Indeed. And so although Bilson did walk in with the Prime Minister this evening, and up until this point has been very strong publicly, the others, though, big question marks as to whether or not they are going to vote for Tony Abbott tonight. But I still think the fact that Morrison has said he won't serve as Tony Abbott's deputy, that could prove pivotal when the votes are tallied in the next few minutes.
I was just going to say, no matter who comes out of there, business is going to want to see them talk. But you know what? The economy isn't going to improve overnight. We've got, as I keep telling you, a very tumultuous week ahead. Overseas factors, the Fed, interest rates, iron ore prices will continue going down. Even if Malcolm Turnbull is the messiah within the Liberal Party, he can't turn back the global economy. So they're going to be looking, he'll get a very short bounce, I would think, from the business community and the markets, but then he's going to have to do something. And the question is, what can he do in the short term? And secondly, will business actually support him this time? As they said they would Tony Abbott, but never put their hands in their pocket. So he's going to find it hard. His only advantage is he knows them, he can talk to them, he might get some short-term confidence and backing. And some of the business leaders he will speak to might be more in touch than the ones Tony Abbott had around him.
Yeah, Graham Richardson, let me ask you this. Leaders the second time round, just thinking through what we've seen historically, John Howard, of course, came back after a pretty ordinary stint as leader and then became a very successful Prime Minister. Kevin Rudd only had a very brief time back in the job after losing it in 2009. I don't know whether he was any better. I think, arguably a little. Do leaders learn from their experience? Second time round, generally, are they better?
Depends entirely upon the individual and the sort of character they are. You can never teach a genius anything, so Rudd was never going to learn anything. But I think in John Howard's case, he did learn. I think he also gained in confidence. He was awkward socially in his early days. You look at him now in front of an audience, and he's right at home, jokes, and he's relaxed. He was nothing like that when he started, so he grew in the job, and that's the test. Can you grow in the job? And I think at the moment we're going to find out with Malcolm, but I mean, Malcolm's looking so confident at the moment that he'll start off in a rush, and as long as he keeps the ego in check, he may do very well. You've just got to remember, though, when he was leader last time, there were a couple of big mistakes. He can't afford to make those this time.
He has to be a change man.
He's got to be a change man. The Malcolm Turnbull, who was opposition leader, if that's the same one that we're electing tonight to lead our nation, then I think we're in big trouble.
Well, the point, but the truth would be that he's not going to be that guy because... You go.
Sorry, I was just going to ask you, Paul. I mean, if he does win, and I think you're the only one here tonight predicting that he won't, but if he does, how does he deal with the Conservative wing of the party and indeed the membership of the party, who are pretty clear about where they stand on this? This is going to be the first and arguably biggest challenge he'd face.
Well, I think that should that be the case, that Malcolm Turnbull does win, he's going to have to reach out to the Conservative base instantly. That starts with Alan Jones. It moves through to television shows, and he's got to take his licks from those who are going to want to yell and scream at him. But apart from that, he needs to make sure that there is not a dramatic change to the party where it becomes Labor Party light. This has to still be the political party that believes you have to do something about a $35 billion deficit. The party that believes that with just under 800,000 people unemployed, that should be the reason to change things such as an industrial relations system. This can't just be the Q&A Prime Ministership. This can't just be ruled by Twitter. This has to be a Liberal Party leadership. It has to be a Liberal Party government that remains, because the truth is there already is an opposition who's willing to give everyone everything that they want and tell them they don't have to pay for it, and that's the one that's already leading in the polls. The bloke has to reach out to genuine Conservatives and can't rush too quickly on very settled matters in the party like same-sex marriage, and I share the same view as Malcolm Turnbull, but 2/3 of his colleagues don't agree. He's got to deal with things like that. He can't just go to, as I said, Labor Party light in 2 weeks in order to win over Twitter.
And he's going to stick with the plebiscite. We had that confirmed from his office earlier.
And he should do it this year.
Telling colleagues that he will stick with the plebiscite.
What does he do with Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey? I mean, Tony Abbott, you would expect if he loses, goes to the back bench, and we don't know then what happens. But Joe Hockey, I mean, does he do likewise? I mean, can you sit there with Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey on your back bench?
Would Joe Hockey serve in the cabinet? That's another question.
I think he needs Joe Hockey on the front bench.
Paul is saying is you need Scott Morrison as Treasurer. That is the key move. Morrison is going to be so important in terms of bringing that component of the party that Paul was alluding to with Malcolm Turnbull. If he wins tonight, it's crucial, not just in terms of symbolic terms, but in terms of performance. Morrison has been a standout minister and is seen as competent. He would need to help turn around the ship, turn around the economy, which, as Janine eloquently put, is sluggish at best right now.
See, the other thing I think that needs to be said here is that Malcolm Turnbull's clearly a moderate. On the other hand, Tony Abbott and his supporters are obviously Conservative. The Liberal Party is a party that needs, I believe, as John Howard has always said, to listen to its moderates, but adhere mostly to the Conservative wing. Now, Malcolm Turnbull's going to have to learn that. That'll be hard because it'll go against not just his own views on a lot of issues philosophically, but the nature of his electorate, you name it, his closest supporters. He has to be mindful of that.
Well,
now,
Peter,
yep.
Let me just put this in there. I mean, I don't think anyone in the party room are going to be willing to say this, but is this one of these moments at which the party does potentially fracture. And I don't mean a permanent split where they, two separate parties emerge, but where you do have this sort of fracture over the leadership, and then, this has been brewing a long time, but this is the moment when it's happening, that is very hard to heal. Whichever way this goes, there is going to be a deep wound there for some time.
Yeah, I think that is a real issue. But again, how he handles that will be the test. The only way that Malcolm Turnbull is going to be successful as Liberal leader if he becomes Prime Minister tonight is if he learns from his mistakes as past leader, the same way John Howard learned from his mistakes when he was leader in '89, fluffed it, got rolled, and then came back successfully in '95, and look at the Prime Minister that he became. Now, John Howard was too much of a Conservative, and he started listening to the moderates. Tony Abbott is Malcolm Turnbull was too much of a moderate, you could argue, who now has to listen much more to the Conservatives, and I would argue even more than he would like, because whether you like it or not, Conservatives, they have to move with the times. I'm not talking about a lot of the high-profile Conservatives that I think are on the fringe of the party, but I think that the Conservatives that are prepared to move with the times, you're one, Paul, he really needs to listen to them inside and outside of the party.
Which is why I think that you need to remove things like, the electoral advantages that the Labor Party has and the internal party polling that the Liberal Party has is that something like same-sex marriage, people believe in a plebiscite, just do the damn plebiscite this year. Don't worry about the election or after the election, just do that, let the country kill it off, or have it as it is. You need to remain very solid on things like Islamofascism. You can't pretend that holding hands and kumbaya makes Islamic State or kids in Melbourne wanting to...
Probably word it a little differently, but I get your point.
What I'm saying is that national security, an area where this is a real... It's not just an advantage for Tony Abbott, it's something that matters to the people. Malcolm Turnbull said nothing about this. He really is a bit of a void in this area.
Shadow Minister for Communication. Give him...
No, but hang on. We shouldn't over-egg He said that one that...
I agree.
It would have been seen as disloyal, wouldn't it?
No, I agree, but I'm just saying, we're talking about what does he need to do to reach out to the base, to the Conservatives. I'm just saying, the fear Conservatives have about Malcolm Turnbull is that he's going to be more kumbaya, the kick in the backside, about...
Yeah, and he can't do that. He can't do that. But you've got to remember, John Howard did very well at pandering to Conservatives without giving them everything that they wanted.
Can I ask...
And they liked him for it.
Correct.
Turnbull has to go further than that because he's not as conservative as John Howard, obviously. He does have to listen to people like Alan Jones. He's got to mend those relationships. But there are others that I think go further than that, and they're the ones that he has to put to one side because they're never going to be convinced. They've always called on moderates to loyally support Conservative leaders, but they've got no sense of then loyally supporting a non-Conservative leader themselves. I think we know the sort of people.
Well, that's one of the important things to do in that sense is to give your ministers a bit of, a bit of scope, a bit of leeway to run their portfolios, whether it be in security or whatever else. I think the bottom line for Turnbull will be, and it's the very old adage, it's the economy, stupid. That's going to be his focus.
Well, you saw that in the comments.
You saw it in the comments from the outset. He'll let the security ministers run their own race, and you'll see Dutton remain most likely in immigration. You'll see Keenan remain where he is, and they can run that agenda. But I think Turnbull, he'll be the economic message, and that'll be underpin his prime ministership if he wins tonight.
Can I ask a question that everybody is actually asking and we haven't touched on? Everybody wants to know whether whoever wins, will we be going to an election early? That is the key question the man on the street wants to know.
Well,
if it's Malcolm Turnbull and even if it's Tony Abbott.
Not based on what either of them have said. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull, the only thing he said about that was the election's due 10 or 11 months from now, and I don't think he should necessarily rush to an election. I'm sure everyone has different views on this, but I tend to think one of the failures for Julia Gillard back in 2010 in rushing to an election soon after bringing down Kevin Rudd, and similarly for Kevin Rudd in not taking more time to establish themselves as Prime Minister. This is one of the rare moments where Malcolm Turnbull, if he wins tonight, could have a full year to establish himself as Prime Minister. We touched on this.
Well, he's going to need a new federal director of the Liberal Party. We've got to remember that. So how does Loughnane stay in if he's
pretty well respected? He's pretty well respected, and I
think he could remain.
Well, I've heard from some Turnbull backers that they would like him to remain.
Okay.
I don't know if he will, but that's anyway. Turnbull has opportunities to strut the world stage, the G20 at APEC, and all these things. He could no doubt go to the Paris Climate Summit, establish some prime ministerial credentials. fundamentals and at home start rolling out reforms. And you can't just announce a GST increase or an industrial relations package and then go to an election.
No.
You need to sell it. This is the criticism of Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey. He needs the time. He needs to use the time that's available to him. So I don't think he should. I don't think he will rush to an election. Nor do I think Tony Abbott necessarily, because hey, let's face it, if he scrapes through tonight and wins, gosh, I mean, is he going to rush to an election? No.
No way.
He's going to need as much time as he can to try and convince voters that they're not the shambles that Labor was. They are a somewhat unified team.
And
that's
David,
not going to be
David,
Malcolm Turnbull.
I don't see how Malcolm Turnbull could run to an election with the federal director of the Liberal Party, who's married to the chief of staff of the Prime Minister and seen as almost a triumvirate in decision making. I mean, as much as I like Brian Loughnane, I just can't see how that would be workable.
Well, the other thing I was going to say was there will be a major reshuffle, whatever happens here. It'll be interesting to see what that does, because you only need to free up 4 places to actually free up 12 places. You have 4 cabinet ministers that go, for example, if that's how many it ends up being, then voila, you've got 4 people promoted from the outer ministry, you've got 4 Parl 6 promoted, you've got 4 people from outside of the parliamentary secretary ranks on the backbench promoted. So there is an amazing ability to rejuvenate as well as get people on board, not just your own side. Malcolm Turnbull has to be very careful that he doesn't just promote those that backed him. And that is a way to immediately refresh. And by the way, if Tony Abbott does somehow win this and we're all wrong, if he wins this, he can do the same.
Agree.
There is a way for him to actually suddenly bring people in that have felt excluded by just getting rid of those that were involved in this particular plot. I don't think that'll happen, but that is worth watching if we all get surprised.
Yeah, and that's why I think if Tony Abbott wins, Julie Bishop most likely stays as Foreign Minister one way or the other. I think it'd be pretty and maybe Deputy Leader, but I think she'd probably stay as Foreign Minister for that very reason. Let's bring in Chris Kenny, who now joins us tonight. Chris, I know you've no doubt been watching all of this and trying to get a newspaper out tomorrow as well.
Mate, I've been at dinner. I don't know how you guys are still talking about all this.
All right, mate. So what's your expectation as to what's going to happen here? What do you think the result will be?
Well, like the rest of us, we're guessing a bit. But, early in the day, I heard that Malcolm Turnbull was very confident, that his numbers, people were very confident of 52 votes. They thought they had more, but they reckon they had 52 firm yeses. Now, as you know, that's enough for a narrow victory. But my sense later in the day is that there are more people in the party room felt that this was either going to be a win for Turnbull or so close to it that it would condemn them to a similar procedure in a few months' time. So the numbers were starting to fall his way. I know that Turnbull in his pitch to people for votes was saying he had 60 votes. Now that would be a pretty comfortable win if he got that. But there is a sense, even from Abbott loyalists in the party room, that they're almost forced into doing this, because if it doesn't work, the government's going to be damaged. They're going to be back here for a second tilt, a la Paul Keating back in the early 90s. So, if pushed to put my $5, which is the maximum I would ever bet on politics on this, I would suggest that we might have a new Prime Minister tomorrow.
Yeah, all right. And is that the right call, Chris?
Well, it's very difficult for me I have to remind people I was Malcolm Turnbull's Chief of Staff when he was rolled by Tony Abbott, so I've kind of got some personal skin in this game, if you like.
Since then.
A lot of water under the bridge, but my key point here is I don't believe a leadership change was necessary. I believe the government and the fundamentals of the government are in place for them to win the election, with Tony Abbott staying at the helm or with a leadership change. So I think it's unnecessary leadership dislocation. But I think that if they do this tonight and they do it emphatically and quickly, the government could possibly recover pretty quickly. Malcolm Turnbull's pitch was very strong. He talked about this missing economic narrative, this narrative of productivity, of innovation, of economic growth that's been missing. Tony Abbott, I think, has paid a high price here for being so loyal to Joe Hockey. This has been the missing element for the government, is their economic narrative. But there'll be a lot of problems for Malcolm Turnbull too. He doesn't have an office in place to run the country. You guys have just been talking about the dynamic with the Federal Secretariat. I think Brian Loughnane would stay, but that would be a tense relationship. We could have people resigning from the party at the far fringes of the party, Corey Bernardi and the like. They might say, this is not my Liberal Party anymore. And we've already seen a shot across the bow from Warren Truss about the coalition agreement. So, look, most of this will be said in the heat of the moment, and probably most of them will just get on with life afterwards. But, there are some people who really see Malcolm Turnbull as the sort of extreme extreme end of the Liberal Party, and they won't like that direction.
And I think that's a really solid point from Chris about particularly more conservative senators potentially thinking of the idea of breaking away, as dramatic as all of that is. The truth is, for the next 18 months, the second most powerful position in the country to being the Prime Minister is to be one of the 8 senators to decide what does and doesn't happen in the country. If you want to pull it in a more conservative direction, look, I don't know that's going to happen, but I think it's an interesting idea. I think it's a more logical threat than Warren Truss pretending the Nationals are going to pull it away.
Paul, I think the other dynamic here is I think it's been obvious for a number of months that Malcolm Turnbull's been wooing those Senate independents, and I thought David Leyonhjelm's play into the Canning by-election the other day was a deliberate play into the Liberal Party's leadership tensions. So I think if Malcolm Turnbull wins the leadership, if he is installed as Prime Minister tomorrow morning, he'd be sworn in if he wins this vote tonight. If we see Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister, I think one of the key focuses you'll see is him suggesting that he can negotiate and charm his way through the Senate. And perhaps one of the first issues we'd see coming up there would be the China Free Trade Agreement or the higher education reforms.
Well, we also saw, just on crossbenchers, I think it was Jackie Lambie tweeting an image earlier of herself with Malcolm Turnbull. So I think Chris is on to something there. That, you know, you've got a degree of greater support, I would think, amongst some of those crossbenchers, at least, for,
I think Glenn Lazarus did the
how
same.
that plays out. Right. Well, how that plays out in terms of when he comes to bowl up tough legislation, I don't know. But he has done a lot of groundwork with these crossbenchers, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it is fair to say. And the other thing is, we should remember, just remind ourselves, I think, of the importance of the Julie Bishop component with those in the room. She, as we all know, has been a very strong foreign minister, but also has been is very, very popular with the backbench. Chris Kenny, give us your thoughts on that in terms of Julie Bishop.
Well, I think Julie Bishop has gone out there in lights today. She's been very upfront about this. Now, Julie's been very sensitive to criticism in the past because, of course, she's been deputy to, 4 or 5 leaders, but she says she's always done the right thing and been loyal to the leader right up to when it counted, right up till the vote. Well, this time, of course, she's split off beforehand, but no one can criticise her for not being upfront about that. I think she's seen as very saleable to the public. I think it's very important, given the scarcity of women in the Liberal parties, in the government's front benches, that she maintains that leadership position. So my expectation would be that she remains as deputy leader under Malcolm Turnbull and foreign minister. Of course, she could choose to go back to Treasury, but that's a possibility. But I don't think she'd do that. I think she'd stay in foreign policy, where she's obviously
Chris,
found a great career.
If Tony Abbott prevails here, and most of us are doubting that, but if he does, what changes does he need to make? We know, the Australian has been, again, I think in recent days, saying that Joe Hockey needs to go in its editorials, and Peter Cretland as Chief of Staff as well. Do you think Tony Abbott would be prepared to make any of those sort of changes? Well,
yeah, that's the Australian editorials, as long as a year ago, maybe longer, were suggesting that there should be a change of treasurer. I think it's been obvious the government struggled not just in delivering economic policy, but in carrying an economic narrative. So obviously the focus has fallen on Joe Hockey there, among others. They did go a year without an assistant treasurer, for instance. So, this is why Tony Abbott's in this position. He recovered very well after the leadership scare in February, but the budget was more saleable, and he and Scott Morrison and Joe Hockey got out and actually contributed to the public debate very well and started to turn things around. But there are 2 things I thought he left unattended there. One is the Joe Hockey situation. He was always going to exist at the mercy of Joe Hockey. If Joe Hockey failed, that was always going to impact on Tony Abbott. And I don't think anyone could possibly say that Joe Hockey has succeeded in carrying an economic narrative. And the second point was the office. Yes, Peter Cretland. It's not a matter of getting rid of her, in my view. What they needed to do was change the way the Prime Minister's office operated so that backbenchers and other staffers and interest groups all felt that they could get the ear of the Prime Minister's office. Now, to his credit, Tony Abbott tried to do that. There was a big move to recruit Tony Nutt, the former Chief of Staff to John Howard, but at the last minute that fell over. So I think what you've seen happening over the past 5-6 weeks is as the government's encountered political problems, some of them really quite just superficial political problems, media storms and the like, but what the backbench and even ministers have seen, that they said, well, nothing's changed in the Prime Minister's office. It's still rigid, it's still isolated. They didn't see enough change there, and I think that's what's helped to bring all this to a head.
Now, what about Michael Kroger? Let me bring you back in here. I know you are restrained somewhat in what you can and can't say, but what about change for Malcolm Turnbull based on what we saw last time he was leader? What are the sort of things he would need to address this time around?
Well, look, I was president when Jeff Kennett was leader and John Howard was leader, and they both lost the leadership. They went for a period in the wilderness and they came back.
You're leaving our marks up though, right?
They were both immensely better leaders the second time round. So if Malcolm Turnbull does win tonight, what are the things he needs to change? He's got to remember that the policies are made by the parliamentary party, not by the individual. And I think he led with his chin a bit on a few policies last time, which got him into a lot of trouble, and global warming was obviously one of those. He's got to remember that it's essentially a centre-right party, and you know, Malcolm is it's hardly surprising to say, more to the left of the party than Tony and most of us. So he's got to remember that, you know, he reflects the views of a centre-right organisation. He needs to be more consultative with his colleagues, and I'm sure if he does win, he'll know that. He's learnt that. You know, people that aspire to the Prime Ministership or Premiership and lose that. You know, Peter Reith knows you've always got the knapsack, the baton in the knapsack, and Malcolm Turnbull's obviously been thinking about what he did wrong, what he needs to change. Obviously his relations with his senior colleagues will change dramatically. He'll be far more consultative and far less freewheeling than he was when he was the leader the last time. I think that's essentially it. More collegiate, less individual, because in the end this is one massive team game. And one of the things that John Howard did very, very differently, the most obvious thing he did when he was the leader the first time, and I think even John would say this himself, and he said it in the interviews with Janet Albrechtsen, that he thought he was not a very good opposition leader the first time. He didn't take enough of his colleagues with him, and when he was the leader the second time, it's well known, he put into his cabinet a group of moderates, especially from South Australia, and that made everyone in the party feel that Howard was a leader for the whole party, and that'll be Malcolm's challenge, which I'm sure if he wins tonight, he will know that. He will know that. He will know that he's got to have the full diverse range of views in his cabinet, and I'm sure if he wins, he'll do that.
Well, we're now half an hour into this party room meeting. We should know fairly soon, I would suspect, what the outcome is. Who is going to be Prime Minister of Australia? Tony Abbott staying in the job, Malcolm Turnbull taking the job. We're just reflecting a bit on what each would need to do to recover from this, because it is a very messy situation indeed for any serving Prime Minister or anyone coming in to have a party divided on this. Not just MPs and Liberal supporters, voters generally watching all of this, many in the business community, Janine, as well. And I can tell you one senior business figure who I've just been texting back and forth with certainly believes the problem for Tony Abbott has been in the failure to respect that cabinet style of government. And just on the conversation we've just been having, they're not pointing the finger at Joe Hockey, as some are, but at Tony Abbott and Peter Cretton in particular. What are your thoughts on that? What's the business view on where the problem has been for the Abbott government?
Well, they definitely thought for some time it was Joe Hockey. Certainly they were surprised. Well, some were surprised. Some had doubts about him initially. But when we had that spill at the start of the year, they are very... Business people know about managing and managing officers and your executives. So the whole Peter Credlin issue was one they watched keenly. I thought it was interesting. About a month ago, it started to bubble. You were starting to get a lot of criticisms, and people who were dealing around Canberra or dealing with them certainly felt that problem they thought was going to be addressed in February had not been addressed. There was generally a feeling that since that spill, which shocked them and they were concerned, made us look, you know, a bit of a joke internationally, nothing much had changed. There was talk of it. Yes, there was a budget that gave a lot of money away, but it didn't actually change much. And the big fear was, having done an election-style budget last year, where were they going to go next year was the question. So those who were worried about the deficit, who were worried about all the issues, just couldn't see see anything changing. And as I said, don't think that business universally loves Malcolm because he was one of them. In fact, the closer those who've dealt with him have very different views about whether he can change. But they felt this government was not going anywhere. It wasn't changing. And so that was the issue. There needed to be what they call a circuit breaker. Something had to be done. It could have been Joe Hockey, but it was far too late by now.
Is this it?
Yeah,
this is Nicola it? No, he's going back in.
Well, so you seem to be running in and out, locking doors.
Okay.
No, they're out.
Here we go. We're about to find out.
All right, let's stick with this now. Here comes Scott Buchholz. He is the chief party whip. He has the results in his hand. He's about to tell the nation whether Tony Abbott stays as Prime Minister or Malcolm Turnbull is about to take over. Let's tune in. All right, so this way down the corridor there. But they've held this tightly. No one has texted the message out. We know that much.
Yeah, right. Pull that up. Hi, Jules. Everyone right? Thank you for being here tonight. Tonight there were 2 ballots conducted in the Liberal Party room. 1 ballot for leader, 1 ballot for deputy leader. In the leadership was contested by Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Abbott. Malcolm Turnbull was successful on 54, Tony Abbott 44, and we had 1 informal of 99. For the position of deputy leader, we had, to repeat that, 54 and 44. Senator Ronaldson then joined the room to be eligible to vote in the ballot for deputy leader. That was contested by Julie Bishop and Kevin Andrews. Julie Bishop was successful with a vote of 70 to Kevin Andrews 30, making a total of 100.
Was anything said by the...
Did anyone speak? Were there any speeches?
No, so the machinations of the House were nominations were called for, asked to stand in their seat, and we went straight into a secret ballot.
Has Tony Abbott addressed the party room since the vote?
Yes, he has, and I'm sure both Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull and Julie Bishop will address the media immediately after
this. Did he give any indication whether it would be staying on? What did he say to the party room?
Thank you. I might just leave it at that unless you want to add anything.
No, I think that's fine.
Thank you,
said all that
colleagues.
needs to be said.
Thanks, colleagues.
We should expect a media conference soon.
So there you go. Malcolm Turnbull has been elected with a 10-vote margin, the new leader of the Liberal Party. He will become the new Prime Minister of Australia. Tony Abbott, 2 years into the job, is finished as Prime Minister. This vote tonight was clear enough for Malcolm Turnbull as the challenger. Despite all we heard from Tony Abbott's backers over the last several hours, Matthias Cormann, Peter Dutton, Kevin Andrews, Erica Betts, the list goes on, Josh Frydenberg, in the end, they weren't enough to sway the party room. They have gone for change. They have gone for Malcolm Turnbull. They have gone for ending the deficit in the polls the government has struggled through for, well, most of the time that they've been in office, most of the last 2 years. They have banked on Malcolm Turnbull turning things around for them, delivering them success in the polls, success not just in the Canning by-election coming up on Saturday, but at the election due next year. This is a big call to dump a sitting Prime Minister, something they've been so critical of Labor for doing to Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd. Well, now they've done it themselves. Historically, for Australia, what does this mean? Well, for the 3rd successive term of Parliament, we haven't seen a Prime Minister able to hold their job for the full term. Tony Abbott's made it 2 years through this term, but has been cut down now. Malcolm Turnbull will take over. For many who have long wondered and supported Malcolm Turnbull as a politician, now we get the chance to see him in the job as Prime Minister. Now we get the chance to see whether he will be able to turn around what has been an entrenched deficit for the Liberal Party, unite the party, including not just the Conservative wing of the Liberals, but the Nationals as well, given Warren Truss warned they'd have to renegotiate the coalition agreement tonight. Now he has the opportunity to prove whether he has the goods, whether he can live up to the promise that so many have seen.
And we got a good indication as to just what his theme will be, and it will be about the economy, about providing vision for the nation to, in his words, not speak in slogans, but to articulate a vision. We will hear more from Mr Turnbull and his new new old Deputy Leader, Julie Bishop. They'll be addressing the media tonight with more detail as to what the Turnbull government will mean. We can be pretty sure that Scott Morrison will be Treasurer, that is almost certain. That's certainly the view among the Liberals that we've spoken to in the weeks leading up to this event, that if there was to be any change, Morrison would be the Treasurer in a Turnbull government. And I guess in a sign of just how pivotal Julie Bishop's role in this was, the vote for her was 70 in favour. 70 in favour as Deputy to remain as Deputy.
Interesting that Kevin Andrews put his hand up even after Tony Abbott had lost the leadership to Malcolm Turnbull. Then it came to the Deputy's position and Kevin Andrews threw his hat in the ring. A last roll of the dice, I suppose, from the Abbott forces to try and knock off Julie Bishop as the Deputy, and that failed far more emphatically than the leadership vote. Let's get the thoughts of everybody on the panel. Peter Van Olsen, I'll let you go first because you tipped the 54 figure. And that turned out to be right, 54 to 44, a 10-vote gap. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I was wrong on the 45 though, David. I didn't realise that there was one person in that Liberal Party room that can't even work through numbers. But yeah, look, and I should have known, I guess, because obviously there was the one vote in a similar vein in that February spill. But I think that this is a real indication of just how concerned a lot of the marginal seat MPs were with Tony Abbott. They were concerned about the messaging and how much change there has been in some quarters, not all, but in some quarters of the Conservative ranks of the party. We're watching them all file out now, of course. There they all go. Sean Edwards from South Australia, he would have definitely voted for Malcolm Turnbull. Andrew Robb, I understand, was a Turnbull man towards the end. McDonald too. So there was some shifts there in favour of Malcolm Turnbull, not as much as they originally expected. There goes David Johnston, a close ally of Julie Bishop. You would think, therefore, that he certainly went the way that she did. Julie Bishop herself is just about to come down this corridor. She's just standing at the door. But this will be difficult for Malcolm Turnbull going forward to unite the party. But David and Kieran, enough of his, or enough members of the party room took the view that this was the only course of action. Mitch Fifield was a key change as the manager of government business in the Senate, and somebody who signed that letter with the three parliamentary secretaries, him, Brett Mason and Matthias Cormann, to get rid of, or to resign and hopefully in the long run then get rid of Malcolm Turnbull when he was opposition leader. So he was a key shift to bring some right-wingers across.
You'll be hearing a lot more about those who back Malcolm Turnbull now that he's won the job. No question about that. Tony Abbott is filing out, having been defeated. Much in terms of the future of the government will rest on what he does now, how he takes this defeat. I would predict that he will handle this in a far different fashion to Kevin Rudd when he was toppled from the job at a not dissimilar point in his first term. I think Kevin Rudd got a little longer, but I don't think Tony Abbott is going to do to Malcolm Turnbull what Kevin Rudd did to Julia Gillard. We'll see how this all plays out, but this must be an incredibly difficult moment for him, and at least he does have that band of supporters around him to leave that room, file past the cameras. An excruciating moment in so many ways for a Prime Minister to lose their job like this. Paul Murray?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of people who, at this moment, regardless of whether you like Tony Abbott or not, this is the most human moment. It happens in the hour after an election with the person who you've argued about, yelled at for weeks, months and maybe even years. And in the case of Tony Abbott, there'd be generations of political watchers who've had a very strong view, positively or negatively, about him. And this is the most human moment when you go literally from being the most powerful person in the country a couple of minutes before 4 o'clock and then in the lead up to 10 o'clock. You've been sacked by your colleagues. It's a bitter, very bitter pill to swallow. I'm going to save some of my analysis and anger and frustration at the system and the politicians and the people and the types of people who brought this all around, because my swirl of emotions probably have got too many matches in them, and I don't want to burn every bridge that I can see around me. But there are millions of people right now who would be heartbroken that the Prime Minister, who they chose, who they fought for, who they argued, who they wanted, has now been replaced. There will be millions more who now believe that there's a great brand new dawn. But there's a lot of people who, regardless of how they feel about Tony Abbott, feel that days like this are ugly and do not reflect well on the political classes in all of their definition.
Graham Richardson, this is also a moment where the dynamics really shift in a government, not just at the leadership level, but beyond. The power players, it changes the structures, it'll change the personnel in the front line as well. What do you think about this outcome?
The question is, will it change the Liberal Party itself? Because it is a huge step for them to take. This is the party that's always shied away from knocking off sitting Prime Ministers, and here they are, and they've done it in style, I might say. It was a brilliantly executed plan, kept secret from almost the entire world, except for Peter Van Onselen. And I think you've got to say, brilliantly done, brilliantly. Now, when Julia Gillard knocked off Kevin Rudd, she was never forgiven by the public. The public wanted to knock him off too, I think, but they wouldn't forgive her for not giving them the opportunity. But she suffered for that. I don't think Malcolm Turnbull will for this reason. Julia Gillard knocked off a still popular Prime Minister. He was still rating in the 50s. He was still way in front as preferred Prime Minister. This bloke's not. Tony Abbott has been behind Bill Shorten over the last few months, and it's always been a case of who do you dislike most. Now someone enters the race that people have a chance to actually like. And I think that it'll be fascinating to see whether or not they opt to say yes or no to that. Also, tonight, you've got to say that for the Labor Party, it's a huge change, and it's bad news for them. For Bill Shorten and for his Labor colleagues, tonight's a disaster. This is the night they hoped wouldn't happen. They needed Tony Abbott to stay there, and they've lost him. He was an asset to Labor. There's no question about that. By hanging on to the likes of Hockey, by hanging on to Bishop, all of those things, that he represented a lot of things that Australians don't like, and so I really do believe that Labor are going to actually suffer for this, and they're going to have to work a lot harder if they're going to maintain their poll lead. That will disappear, by the way, in the next couple of months. The question is, how long does Malcolm hold the bounce? Will it be 3 months? Will it be 6 months? Or does it last all the way to an election? And nobody can answer that for you. I think the last thing I want to say is I have no doubt that Tony Abbott will react gracefully, because he is a person of grace. I think whatever else you want to say about him, he passes the character test in a big way. He's actually a good person. That doesn't mean his judgment's always right, but he is a good person. And all I can say is I wish him well. For Australia's sake, I wish Malcolm Turnbull well. We need a Prime Minister to do well. The last three haven't. Let's hope the next one does.
It's just going 10 o'clock Eastern. Thanks very much for your company on this rolling coverage of the Liberal leadership change. Malcolm Turnbull, set to be the new Prime Minister of Australia. He's won the ballot tonight, 54 votes to 44. A bit over 6 months on from the failed spill tonight, another spill, and there was not an empty chair. Malcolm Turnbull put his hand up. He has won the Prime Ministership. Julie Bishop will remain Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Leader, I should say, Deputy Liberal Leader, winning 70 votes of the party room. And this is the, putting all the personal impact aside for Abbott, this for the Liberal Party in terms of an emphatic result is the best possible result, whether it went to Abbott or not, or Turnbull. They needed a clear result. They've got that. Now, whether or not they can regroup remains to be seen.
I think it's clear enough. And I also think, I'm just going to note on Julie Bishop, you mentioned there, the fact that she did face a contest from Kevin Andrews, I think is actually a pretty good thing for Julie Bishop. I think there would have been a lot of criticism about someone who'd, seen through four different leaders in different guises as deputy. But you've seen there an emphatic endorsement from the party room of Julie Bishop as deputy leader, 70 votes to 30 against Kevin Andrews. The party want to keep her as deputy leader. They've made that very clear tonight. Janine Perrott, let me get your thoughts on this outcome.
Well, I agree. It's a sad day personally for Tony Abbott. I think it's good for the markets, for business, for confidence, and the economy is what jobs are about. I wanted to say again, the economy doesn't change overnight. Global factors don't change. But having heard Malcolm Turnbull recently give a very inspiring speech about innovation and where we go, the biggest challenge facing this country is how we transition from a commodity market that's dying. We need a vision for your kids' future, for everybody's future. Malcolm Turnbull actually does talk about innovation in a way that is going to inspire. He might actually do things for the long term that are going to be good if people get behind it. On that, I will say you still have a fractured party, and my problem with the fact that it's still a very dark day for Australian politics to change a Prime Minister like this. And I can tell you, a London analyst I just spoke to who's he covers all the tin pot countries around the world. He just says another political putsch in Australia. What is it with you guys? But really, after 5 PMs in 5 years, we're not going to be fazed too much. They don't care. We've got to be very careful. If the politicians have contempt, no wonder the electorate will throw them out at the drop of a hat too. That's the problem you're facing.
What an extraordinary story, the Turnbull career. When you look at it now, for decades he's been talked about as a possible Prime Minister. In 2009 he was rolled for the leadership. He said to us on Sky News that he was going to pull the pin, he was going to leave Parliament, convinced by John Howard and others to stay. Now, over six years on, he has been elected by his party to become the next Prime Minister. It is quite an extraordinary career.
We're going to hear from him shortly with Julie Bishop by his side. Apparently, we'll go live to that as soon as it happens. Just reflecting on Tony Abbott. And also we do need to reflect on the staff as well. And these nights are incredibly painful for so many who are losing their jobs and, you know, devote their lives to these jobs. And this is a difficult moment for them, no doubt. Now, Tony Abbott, 2 years. I think we just need some confirmation on this. I think that makes him the shortest serving Prime Minister since Harold Holt.
Correct.
Richo might pull me up on that, but yeah, that's Paul.
Right.
Thank you. That's
correct. Troy Bramston has tweeted
so
it
it's
as
not
well.
Not a lot.
Yeah.
Well, that must be right. Now, Michael Kroger, let me get your thoughts on this. What went wrong? Tony Abbott, such a successful opposition leader. He saw off two leaders. He came so close after one term in 2010 and then knocked off the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government in 2013, but only lasting 2 years as Prime Minister. What went wrong? And what do you think about this outcome now, putting Malcolm Turnbull in charge to turn things around?
Well, I thought the result would be 10. First time I've got anything right, I might add, in 30 years. And it was. And Julie Bishop was the decisive figure, as I've been saying all night. That made the difference. What went wrong, David, was this. Tony was a great negative campaigner. He wasn't able, as Prime Minister, though, to translate that into explaining to people he had a vision. He wasn't emotional enough. He was, you know, he's a bit like Gillard in the sense that in person, he's an entirely different person than he is on camera. On camera, he was stilted, repetitive, slow. People say he's a bit uninspiring. In private, he's none of those things. If the camera doesn't like you, it doesn't like you. But I'm very sad for him, obviously. He's been a close friend of mine since 1978. He's an outstanding human being. I don't think there's any chance at all that he'll do a Rudd. None at all. Abbott will stiff up a lip. He'll be loyal, and that's the Abbott way, as you've just seen how loyal he was to Joe Hockey, Bronnie Bishop, and all sorts of others that caused him trouble over the years. So I'm very sad for him. But look, politics is a rough business. The public know these things, though. You know, we've been on 46% for a long time. And, you know, he and Joe, unfortunately, were not able to get the message across to the public. And, you know, that's a fact of life. I mean, I think Hockey did an exceptional job at the statistics he came up with tonight, but the public didn't accept that. They didn't accept that Tony had a sufficient vision for the country. Doesn't matter what I think or you know, any other, Peter Reith or any of the Liberals thinks, that's what the public think, and that's what the MPs reflected tonight in voting for Malcolm Turnbull and Julie Bishop. Julie was the decisive character tonight. Will the party unite? I think it will. I mean, I'm historically in the right of the party, and everyone has got to unite behind Malcolm Turnbull now, so they should. He won this ballot fair and square. It's great that Julie's there. Scott Morrison will become Treasurer of the country. That is a very, very powerful trio. And the bad news for Labor tonight is this is the end of Bill Shorten. He will not survive. We'll be back here before Christmas with another night on Sky for those that love these nights, and it'll be the end of Bill Shorten. No, he'll be gone. Shorten will be gone by Christmas. He can't possibly survive. He's going absolutely nowhere. He won't say anything about free trade, etc. So this is a new start for the government. The polls will go up.
All right. Well, that's putting a lot of confidence in Malcolm Turnbull to turn things around. Can I tell you, I'm just hearing from at least one in the National Party that there is some doubt about the coalition agreement. Clearly, well, there are mixed views, I think it's fair to say, in the Nats about Malcolm Turnbull, but some are pretty adamant this is not what they want at all and are raising a doubt about the sustainability of the coalition agreement. I'd be amazed if it's ended.
If it really, and you can see behind me here, we've changed plasmas now. We've got Prime Minister Turnbull behind me, but if the National prepared earlier, if the National Party had wanted to have an issue, there's a lot of them from Queensland, and under their LNP rules, you can either caucus with the Liberals or you can caucus with the National Party. So if they'd wanted somebody else, they should have caucused with the Liberal Party. That's a ridiculous thing. Look, here's the situation. Everyone always on nights like this very understandably see the human side of it. I especially see it for the very good staffers that you deal with in not just ministers that may lose their job out of this, but also in the Prime Minister's office as well, and also for Tony Abbott, because it is likely the end of the road for him. But let's just be clear about one thing, aside from all the sentiment and that human side, this, just like when Kevin Rudd lost the Prime Ministership in his first term, has come about because of one person's problem, and that is the Prime Minister himself. This did not need to happen. They had a massive majority, they had a mandate, they went outside it, there were issues internally, there were all sorts of issues on the way through here, and then he even had a second chance based on the February spill. Now, yes, there was some white-handing, but that's not the story here. No more than it was the story with Kevin Rudd when Julia Gillard ended up taking over the job. Now, she might have mucked up the transition and the Labor Party might not have sold it properly, but just as Kevin Rudd has no one but himself to blame for what happened to him in his first term in office, the same goes for Tony Abbott here. It's a hard thing for them to hear, but history will reflect it absolutely that way.
I disagree. Look,
just in terms of the logistics of this, I should mention I've been told by the Turnbull office the incoming Prime Minister will await the news conference of the outgoing Prime Minister and let Tony Abbott speak first, and then they'll hold the news conference.
Laura Jays has reported that Tony Abbott told the party room after the result that he would back Malcolm Turnbull. He did complain, though, of disloyalty and said that Joe Hockey had been white-handed, according to Laura. So I think we're all in agreement that he's the sort of guy who will get behind, get behind Malcolm Turnbull. Certainly won't do what Kevin Rudd did, but making the point there that he was the victim of disloyalty.
Well, can I just say that that's absolutely true. And what is amazing here is that one of Tony Abbott's huge faults has been loyalty in a business that is not about loyalty, and it's also been holding on to mistakes for far too long because he believed there was a virtue in being loyal. Now, we saw that with Turnbull and Bishop, but we also saw that with Arthur Sinodinos. This country, for more than a year, did not have an assistant treasurer. That's because the Prime Minister, who has just been knifed, who has just been sacked, who's just lost his job in a coup, a bloodless coup nonetheless, in part happens because Arthur Sinodinos got the shits because of the way his dropping as a minister was announced. His frustration was that Peter Credlin, the Chief of Staff, went behind his back and helped announce it to the press. So for that sin, for the sin of who found out about when he lost his job, Arthur Sinodinos was the first of many to start marching towards Malcolm Turnbull's door.
I take a different view. I think because he spent 10 years as the Chief of Staff to a good Prime Minister, he looked at a very average
No. You all want Arthur still on your shows. I understand.
Never been on my show.
Here's the truth.
Never ever been on my show.
Arthur Sinodinos helped do in a Prime Minister who held a job open for him for 12 months. That is a fact. That is part of the problem of Tony Abbott.
It is possible that Arthur Sinodinos formed a view the same as 53 other members of the party room formed a view.
Well,
He's a political operator. He's a smart guy.
But was the government just so good that someone who was Chief of Staff to a very good Prime Minister couldn't possibly think that Tony Abbott didn't do a bang-up job as PM?
No, Peter, and I know there's a lot of people who want to watch the sport of, the Tony Abbott guy yelling and carrying on. I'm not going to do that, but I am not also... Hang on, I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy. And when the time comes around, I'll tell everyone why I was so personally loyal to Tony Abbott, but tonight's not the night, okay? But I'm also not going to sit here and have history rewritten as it goes, pretending that figures like Arthur Sinodinos, who sat here on TV and said, tell me next week, comrade, who was running around telling all and sundry behind the scenes, he deserves a little bit of the blood splatter, as does Julie Bishop, as does...
but the only thing is,
instead, we're just going to pretend that the sun's coming up and Malcolm Turnbull's suddenly going to fix it.
We can be very clear that there will be hang on. There'll be a lot of picking over the entrails in the days and weeks ahead. Well, no, he can be called out as one of the people that was trying to install Malcolm Turnbull. No question.
Thank you.
Of course he was.
Done.
But, obviously 54 people in the party room,
I don't disagree, but
ended up thinking that was a good idea.
Drip. And for a year they have done this bloke in. With the help of the leaking to Peter Harcher. With the help of leaking to Peter Harcher. No. Do the show at another time. My simple point is this: is that I agree, of course 54 at the last minute have decided to turn around. There were 39 who wet the bed last time. But they've all done this not because it's the right thing for the country, but it's to save their own asses. And I think that everyone watching gets incredibly frustrated. A lot of people get frustrated that we've changed the Prime Ministership for the third time.
Mr Richardson.
Can I
because of this.
One comment on that. I understand your passion about this, but it's easy to say they do it to save their own asses and it's got nothing to do with the interests of the country. But I've been in this position, unlike anybody else around here. And what I know is this, if you passionately believe in your party and the way forward, and I was a senator who was number one on the ticket, I couldn't get beaten. It was impossible. All I know is that I had the view that to allow our side to lose and the Liberals to win at that time was a disaster. I thought it was really bad for Australia. I didn't want that to happen. And that's where we were headed. So I put my hand up and knocked off the most popular leader the Labor Party's ever had. And I did it. No, it didn't get anything from me. I was already a cabinet minister. There's nothing in it personally. But you've got to understand there has to be something in you that says it's better for the country. Now, a lot of those people there tonight agonised. I've spoken to a lot of them. And you can't say simply because they crossed the floor and they voted for Malcolm Turnbull, that it means that it was all about self-interest and saving their asses. For a lot of these people, it's been a very difficult exercise and it's been difficult for months.
But earlier in the night you said always back self-interest.
Of course, the self-interest is there all the time.
So it's their
what
job.
Is the self-interest?
But isn't it their
the self-interest is to make sure your party wins.
Isn't that
is the all
Can I interject as well,
So I
Richo?
don't regard Julie Bishop as some sort of traitor or as blood on her hands. What she's done is what she had to do. Because it was obvious they were going to get beaten. It's been obvious for a long, long time. Yet nobody else has ever had that long behind and got that far behind and survived. No one. And Tony Abbott wasn't going to break the mold.
No signs of improving his learning on the job.
Well, signs of it is getting worse.
Yeah,
that's what's happened in the last month.
Well, further to the issue about self-interest, there is the analysis done by, and I know Paul's very clear view on Synodinos and others, but their judgment was that the Prime Minister had been given 6-7 months on from the non-spill, and that he'd been, while a very, a good bloke, and we all agree with that, had been a letdown. And not just him, but the Treasurer. And the fact that he had not got rid of the Treasurer, to many of their colleagues, was simply not good enough, that they weren't heeding the lesson, that they had been a poor government. Now, they got rid of a few things, they honoured those commitments, but if you look at all the key economic indicators and the economic narrative of which a coalition government must be based, they've failed. And that is the judgment of their colleagues tonight.
Yes, I don't doubt. But also, I mean, and this is again where the way these things come about, and part of that failure and the way that the failure is exacerbated is the game of those who want to unseat the leader. Now that's not
if they're doing well.
No, but hang on. But the thing is, you use every circumstance to try to bring about what you want, and that's what Turnbull and Bishop did. But Janine, can I just say, how far out on a limb are I on Arthur Synodinos?
I agree with you 100%.
I mean, please.
Senator Sanctimonious, and I said that in the
Thank you.
If you hadn't heard, totally and utterly, I've been saying that ever since. Part of the problem last year in selling a bad budget was they
job
were
open
down.
for a year.
They were down an assistant treasurer. They were losing one of the key people, which they left open. So they had one.
So was that the key issue, do you think, Janine, in Tony Abbott's downfall?
Well, geez, it helped when you were selling a budget that everyone's serving up as the reason it's terrible.
It went to the issue of loyalty.
Let me jump in here.
Wrong.
I've just been on the phone for the last 5. I can't believe you're still talking about Arthur Synodinos. But anyway, just back from a few quick phone calls.
Single-handedly brought down Tony Abbott.
Don't verbal me, Peter, like that. That's
all right. Let's move on from that.
Because he might be finance minister.
Seriously, don't do that.
Now, Tony Abbott in the party room meeting at the end of this result, once the ballot was clear and he'd lost his job, he said that Malcolm Turnbull, you've got it wrong. He said on our economic management, it has, I don't know the exact word, but he countered that argument from Malcolm Turnbull about the problems around economic management. He singled out Greg Hunt. He singled out Joe Hockey and he singled out Andrew Robb for their strong performance. He referred to the destabilisation and the disloyalty that's been there as big factors in the government's problems, but specifically singling out those 3 ministers, not Julie Bishop. There was no mention of Julie Bishop, I'm told, in the speech from Tony Abbott. Malcolm Turnbull did make some very brief remarks but said he would save his speech for what's called the Blue Room, which is that press conference room there, where we'll hear from Malcolm Turnbull a little later. So he didn't say a lot. There is a lot of anger going on right now, particularly amongst the Abbott forces, obviously, at this outcome, at what has happened here. The Liberal Party, for the first time ever, bringing down a serving Prime Minister like this, and a lot of finger pointing going on as well as to who was responsible, not just Malcolm Turnbull, obviously, but the other key players who have done the numbers here and, as it's been put to me, knifed a sitting Prime Minister. Now, some of the names that are being blamed for all of this by the very angry supporters of Tony Abbott tonight, and whether this anger dissipates after tonight and they can all unify, we'll see. But right now there is white-hot anger, and down in the Prime Minister's office right now, some are shell-shocked, there are commiserations going on, there's a lot of emotion going on. So bear that in mind. But some of those who are down there, and including those who we've been hearing from tonight amongst the supporters of Tony Abbott, they are squarely, Kieran, pointing the finger at a few Victorians, in particular Scott Ryan, Mitch Fifield, Kelly O'Dwyer, who they believe have been pivotal in bringing down Tony Abbott, also Stuart Robert, Christopher Pyne, they suspect as well. So there's a lot of blaming going on right now, a lot of anger going on right now. As I say, this is a very emotional night for a lot of them, and whether they can unify after this, we'll see. But it's not... Not looking good.
Well, that's inevitable, though, isn't it? I mean, that's inevitable if you're going to tear down a sitting Prime Minister. But what I think is encouraging for the Liberals is that Cabinet Ministers weren't out condemning Turnbull as some sort of, psychopath, as we did see Labor do with Kevin Rudd. They completely smashed Rudd, tore him down. His character assassinations were unbelievable. Today, at least publicly, the Cabinet Ministers have been a lot more cautious in their language. In fact, none of the ones we spoke to before the spill ruled out serving in a Turnbull cabinet. So while there's some angst and there's some concern, that's inevitable, but at least publicly, the Cabinet Ministers that we've spoken to not ruling out serving in a Turnbull cabinet. One individual that's worked very closely with Malcolm Turnbull's Chris Kenny, a former Chief of Staff to Mr Turnbull. Now, Chris, I've spoken to a former colleague of yours who made this assessment of Turnbull as an opposition leader. He essentially was bored by it. He wasn't challenged enough as Prime Minister. Their view is that he will step up to the plate in that regard. What do you make of that assessment, Chris? Okay, we've got some issues there with Chris. We'll get to him as soon as we can. Peter Van Onselen, your thoughts on that?
Sorry, mate, I was actually going through text messages. I'm sure it was really interesting, but I'm sorry.
It was Michael Kroger, please, something?
No, I was just going to say, you made a comment earlier on about the coalition agreement, and the National Party member had sent you a text. I would think there was absolutely no chance at all that the National Party agreement would be in doubt. None at all. It's not in our interest, it's not in the National Party's interest, so I put to bed any thought that that's happening. And of course, what happens after these leadership changes take place, you get the people on the losing side, who are unhappy, I'm distressed, as many people are, for Tony. But to blame Chris Pyne, for goodness sake, that would be absurd. I mean, I don't think anyone's been closer to the PM and supported him more than Chris over the last umpteen years, and this is what happens.
I should stress, Michael, these are supporters of Tony Abbott who are. Yeah, well, it's an emotional, there's a lot of anger, white-hot anger, in fact, and there's a lot of blame being sprayed around. Now, I'm not saying that these people were necessarily to blame for all of this, but that's what's being said.
But look, I think the other things we say are these. As I said earlier, I certainly hope Brian Loughnane remains as the federal director of the party. Even though Kevin Andrews and Malcolm have had disagreements in the past, Kevin Andrews has been an outstanding minister in this government, irrespective of what some of the left-wing press say. I hope Kevin Andrews stays in cabinet. Look, people like Andrew Robb, who there was speculation that he'd leave cabinet. You've got to have all those A-grade players. Tony Abbott had some very, very strong performers, and you just hope that most of those stay in the cabinet, and there's not too much dislocation between now and the election, because it's only a year away. It's only a year away.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, your thoughts there that that he needs to stick with the likes of Kevin Andrews, Andrew Robb, Peter Van Onselen. Out of those two names, I can only guess what you might think of that suggestion.
Well, I mean, I'd stick with Kevin Andrews if I was the Parliament United Party and I had one person in my upper house or something. But look, I think Kevin Andrews
Peter, you're a goose. You're a goose in that case, Peter.
And I wear that with a badge of honour from you. Thanks, Michael. But look, I take the view that Kevin Andrews is clearly not someone that's part of the future. He's part of the past, and he probably was well before now. Andrew Robb's a different situation. It's not an age-based thing. I think he's older out of the two of them. Andrew Robb has been an absolute success story in this government, and I say that as somebody who wrote him off before they got into government, and is happy to have a whole heap of humble pie over that one. He's been a success. He should continue on as long as the party is able to convince him to continue on. And I think there's a lot of other complicated ones in the mix. It depends what you think about how the campaign is structuring around someone like Brian Loughnane. It shouldn't be relevant that he is married to Peter Credlin. Let's just make that patently clear. But what is relevant is whether you think the campaign has been firing on all cylinders. His future is entirely dependent on an audit or an assessment of that. Maybe it's just too hard to change, even if the answer to that is no, because you don't want that kind of holus bolus problem. Going back to what you said, KG, I did actually hear the first half of it once I'd told everyone that I wasn't listening. I think that the natural reaction that we're hearing from Conservatives, there will be some that will hold that line going forward. And that's a major problem for Malcolm Turnbull, unquestionably. But there'll be a lot of them that will cool off after tonight. And I tell you who I think will be at the forefront of helping them cool off, and it will be to his absolute credit. I think Tony Abbott will be. Because whatever disagreement you might have about him on a policy sense, whatever I might think about his mismanagement as a Prime Minister, and I have firm views about that, I think as a person, particularly as a person without the power of the Prime Ministership, I don't think that he handled that as well as he should have. But I think as a person at his core, I think he will seek to put the Liberal Party first in the aftermath of this, and that will involve talking to a lot of those Conservatives that are currently very unhappy. I think that will be his approach.
Just though, on the issue of conservatism, and I think this is a conversation that will be bigger and longer as the days roll on, but we have a scenario now where the popular discourse doesn't really reward conservatism the way that it used to. The public discourse, which is either overfilled by outrage of the day, filled on social media or whatever the hand-wringing cause is of the day. Conservatism often can be about, you know, eat your veg versus the flashy promises that often come with more progressive politics. So here's a question about, do you believe that, not that it's the death of conservatism, but do you believe that there is a pause on the Tony Abbott style Conservative becoming Prime Minister again?
I think there's a pause on the Conservative that plays to the to his or her right flank. I think a Conservative now has to play to his centre, and I think a moderate like Malcolm Turnbull has to play to the Conservative right. But I think that the idea of the harder right, just like in the Labor Party, the harder left, I think that those days are done in a compulsory voting structure, personally.
Yeah. Well, Richo, what do you think just about that idea about, you know, the Conservatives that have been Abbott, Howard? Do you think that that era of politician has ended, and in the 24/7 daily outrage factor, which is often about emotion, not about anything else, do you think that a Conservative can reign again?
I don't think Howard was a Conservative in the Abbott mould, because he was able to listen and he consulted widely, and so that if you weren't on his team, you still felt like you had a voice. I think the problem here is that no one felt like they had a voice unless they were really close to him and they were in his office. I mean, it was a big problem for him.
Because the fear that I have about where Malcolm Turnbull is going to go, and this is where it's going to be up to him to, if he can grasp that this is going to be the beginning of his great success. But he needs to understand that it's not just playing to Twitter in the inner city, it is about the suburbs, the outer suburbs, the pub test and all the rest of it. And it's not just politics in the pub test, it's the chicken schnitzel in the pub test.
I hope it's not just playing to the Conservative columnists.
No, I agree. I'm just saying, we're talking about this.
Narrow that I think Tony Abbott listened to, that you have to be
That was the problem.
broader.
Of course that was the problem.
So the people he was listening to do not necessarily reflect it. Yeah. Now, how are they going to react to this? We talk about the backbench and the white-hot anger.
Furious.
We want to know, I mean, they're the people, you talk about Twitter, but these people people have a microphone, have columns. Now, they have pretty well said some shocking things about Turnbull and what they think. Are they going to rally too behind the Prime Minister, or are you going to have two opposition?
But we can limit the numbers.
Well, I have and I won't.
We can limit the numbers that have done that. I mean, you know, Janet Albrechtsen had criticism of Tony Abbott. Malcolm Turnbull can take up the cudgels of that criticism, reform it, and will get credit. Grace Collier, same deal. You can say the same thing about Miranda Devine. She was extremely critical about Peter Credlin, and I believe that she would.
But then they moved back and they became.
She's not exactly fulsome in a praise of Malcolm Turnbull.
That's true. But look, I don't think that all of them. I think some are, but I don't think all of them are ungettable for Malcolm Turnbull. And frankly, he has to try. Alan Jones would be another one. It'll be harder because, Richo, you know as well as anyone.
I think this, in the end, the great Satan is the one they finish up hating. And the great Satan is always going to be Bill Shorten and the Labor Party. It's not going to be other people in the Liberal Party. So in the end, all of these people, outraged as they may be today, will get over it because as an election approaches, it's Bill Shorten or Malcolm Turnbull. And I think I know where Miranda Devine, Andrew Bolt et al. Are going to head.
And if he wants Alan Jones, he only has to stop the Chenois mine, doesn't he?
Can do a bit more than that.
Not a bad point, not a bad point. So, look, just reflecting on Tony Abbott, we're going to hear from him, we assume, shortly. Not an easy speech to give, not one he has to give, but he is apparently going to be making some remarks before we hear from Malcolm Turnbull and Julie Bishop. For Tony Abbott, I mean, what does he say here? I would suspect, and we've kind of reflected on this, that he's not about to launch into an attack on Malcolm Turnbull or try and counter the arguments that have been put publicly and very privately amongst colleagues tonight as well, but perhaps give us an indication of what his plans are now, whether he's content to sit on the backbench, whether he sticks around in Parliament or not. You wouldn't think he's about to go and force a by-election by any stretch, but no doubt thanking his staff and his colleagues and singling out some of those that he did single out in the party room, which, as I mentioned, were Andrew Robb, Greg Hunt and Joe Hockey. And, well, we know Joe Hockey certainly was very publicly defending him, but I think they're a fair three for him to single out. Anyway, Andrew Robb having landed those three free trade agreements. Greg Hunt, often underrated, but someone who did steer through in a difficult environment a policy that, well, Peter, you know, many have criticised in direct action, but he's done a reasonably good job, I think, in being able to craft it and sell it.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Greg Hunt is what happens from here. Does he finally get a shot at another portfolio? Because he's a talented bloke. You know, former management consultant at McKinsey, very bright guy, has capabilities well beyond the environment portfolio, but he's always been in that portfolio because he needed to be in that portfolio because of the circumstances of which Tony Abbott took over from Malcolm Turnbull. I always felt that he was almost used by being put in that portfolio and deserved extra credit for being prepared to go through that process. He did it with aplomb, and as a result, what happens now? Does he move on?
Yeah.
And if he moves on, presumably, then he'll get a chance to fire up in another portfolio.
But also, I think this is part of the problem for Tony Abbott was they seem to have a fundamental view that the more stable we are, the better we will be rewarded in the polls. For example, everything in opposition will remain in government, and then when in government, nothing can move inside.
But you know what? That would have worked. That would have worked if they'd renewed when he took over. But there was such a delicate exercise. You know, when he took over, there were so many ex-Howard types that were still in there, at the risk of being called a goose, one of which was Kevin Andrews. And you know, by the time they got to the point where he then didn't want to make changes in government, he then didn't want to rock the boat once in government as the years rolled by. He almost won an election but didn't quite, and then he didn't want to rock the boat after the 2010 election. At the end of all of that, he was left in this quagmire where he hadn't rejuvenated for years and years and years. I think we're about to see Tony Abbott coming in.
And also, rather than sacking Bronwyn Bishop, she got sacked upwards. She got sacked upwards in terms of a higher profile role.
Which backfired.
Correct, and I think that again is part of that's what I was talking about before with Sinodinos, and this idea that, you know, less change equals stability, stability equals adult government equals success compared to the Labor Party. But the problem is their assumption was that, I believe that their fundamental assumption was that within the first 3 months of the government, the Labor Party would have rolled over and done what the Liberal Party did after 07, which is they would have passed the carbon tax cut and they would have passed the mining tax cut. Therefore, by those two things and stopping the boats, they could have said after 12 months, hey, we've done it all.
No,
So I don't agree with you, Peter Van Onselen, about the quality of the
just give you an
cabinet
update here.
either.
We're going to hear in 10 minutes from now
That's
from
my view, they
Malcolm
need to change
Turnbull
it.
and Julie Bishop, the new leader and the remaining deputy. They are due to speak in about 10 minutes. So I don't know if are we going to hear from Tony Abbott.
Well, that's what
before then?
we're yet to have confirmed. I've just been trying to sort that out. But
And you can, as I said,
there is a possibility it might be just a written statement. We don't know.
well, perhaps, and you can forgive anyone in that situation.
There's an attempt to hurry on
themselves to.
There is an attempt to hurry him on. Is that by saying, look, we'll talk in 15 minutes. You've got your 15 minutes to get in and say what you've got to say.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would be. I mean, of course, it goes on all night. There's a million people calling
it is
you and
10:40.
1,000 people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's,
We've been going since 4 o'clock here.
Yeah, exactly. So, look, I think at some point we've got to hear from Malcolm Turnbull very importantly,
of course.
He is the new leader. We're going to get some direction from him in terms of his prime ministership. So, the changes that he's going to make, I would
Well,
suspect
there'll be
time.
more women in the cabinet.
Yeah,
you can
there
rest
will.
assured. Yeah,
He'll
more
have to
than
take
two.
some time. I don't think he needs to rush it out even this week, to be honest. He's no doubt given some thought to this, but obviously we'll be looking at who went where in this vote and who's the best talent. This is a genuine opportunity to reshape the face of the government. So take your time and get it right, I suppose, is the key to all of this. And, you know, he's got to turn his attention to the Canning by-election as well. I mean, boy, oh boy, now that they've changed leaders, he can't afford a bad result there. No. He needs to do, you know, probably better than Tony Abbott would have to show that this was the right move for the party to make. They've made the move, though.
With respect, David, why does he have to do better? Are they going to dump him if he doesn't?
Well,
unless Turnbull's leaking against himself now, no.
So, I mean, really,
That was all the
if it's a
government's
bad
problem, was the
result, I mean,
leaking.
it's a bad result. They've really thrown their, you know, they've shown their colours now. They're going to have to live with whatever happens, aren't they?
But also,
and I'll
but
probably
David,
blame Tony Abbott for any bad
Exactly.
numbers.
But also, David, when you were talking about taking your time to name a cabinet, you're absolutely right. But don't forget, there's 3-4 more question times that are due this week. I don't imagine the leader can just stand there and have a two-man cabinet and answer every question. I think that'll be fascinating.
Presumably they can't suspend question time indefinitely as well. That would just be optically a real
No, well,
problem.
the key one
Which is why these things happen on
The key one is
Thursday,
the
isn't it?
treasurer. You can't. I don't think you can go into question time tomorrow with Joe Hockey as treasurer if indeed you are intending. Well, you can't. I mean, Joe Hockey tonight and Malcolm Turnbull have been the most directly at odds with each other in the whole government. Malcolm Turnbull, you know, positioned his whole case on the failure to achieve and sell economic reform. Joe Hockey came out to directly take that on. So he can't go in tomorrow as treasurer. Whether he needs to do the wholesale reshuffle by tomorrow's question time, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
But, you know, maybe
I think we'll know that Scott Morrison is going to be treasurer. You wouldn't be surprised if he actually made that clear tonight, given how pivotal that role will be. Julie Bishop, of course, stays as foreign minister. She's been successful at that. Rob will stay trade minister. The ones that you think would go, Kevin Andrews, you would think would go, but to be honest, what a debacle in terms of the number of defence ministers through Russell. They've had. We talk about the number of prime ministers that we've had. What about the number of defence ministers in the last couple of years? If Andrews does go, as you'd expect he would do, Betts is the other one that almost certainly would go.
Yeah, I'm just getting the exact number on this because someone was texting it to me just a short while ago about the number of defence ministers we've been through. I see someone tweeted as well, their 2-year-old has lived through 4 prime ministers.
Isn't that slightly sad? Like, this is the thing that it's like.
Yes.
But it's like. But also, I wanted to talk. We talked about this before. But you know, Richo, For Malcolm Turnbull now and the bounce and the fact that often, because of the way of how condensed our cycle is, how much conversation there is, it can often be a dead cat bounce. Does he have to make big decisions or big personnel things? What are those early days to actually make sure that whatever bounce you get goes, that is a genuine game changer, not just a pressure valve?
People will not want massive change to everything overnight.
Right.
Australians usually react badly to that. What they will expect, though, is a completely new government. They'll expect a big-time reshuffle. They expect that now. What they expect... Sorry. One second. What they expect from him, I think, what they want from him now is a plan. The one thing that Abbott and Hockey have not had in the last 12 months is a plan to get us out of deficit into a surplus. I mean, their numbers are a joke and everyone knows it. He'll need to produce some sort of mini budget to show us he can get on track, a plan that shows us somewhere back. Now, he's got one big advantage. Morrison is very much trusted. People believe him. If he says he can do it, then I think he's got credibility to take with him.
Yeah, I agree with that. Whatever way you slice it, tonight has been an extraordinary night. I think that Malcolm Turnbull now has one hell of a task to unite his party, but Scott Morrison, as his treasurer, will be able to help him enormously, but you cannot underestimate the significance of the economic challenges. And here's the issue with Tony Abbott. Tony Abbott proved that as Prime Minister, he didn't move on from his time as opposition leader. He knew exactly what he opposed. He wasn't sure what he was in favour of, not because he didn't have a philosophical worldview, he does, but he was afraid to enunciate it. He was worried about the things that Paul Murray says about whether Conservatives can truly exist in this modern age that we're in. Malcolm Turnbull has it all in front of him now. Can he unite the party? I don't know. There will be divisions. The National Party may be a problem on the way through, but the challenge is there for him now. The only option for the Liberal Party from here is for them to unite, because if they don't unite, they get a Labor government in 2 years or in 1 year time.
But again, on those practical factors that we've talked about, though, which is there's a $35 billion budget deficit, could be worse. Let's see what the numbers are. The Senate will not approve a single spending cut.
Huge problem.
And will only agree to a tax increase on people earning over $100,000. That is not going to fill a $35 billion hole.
The only way it happens is taking it to an election, I think.
I agree.
That's the key.
And my belief is that regardless of who won tonight, we would get an election probably before the next budget. So as close to that as possible. But as Richo's written, the Labor Party, in budget and reply, they stood there and made $40 billion of extra promises. I mean, Janine, this is the thing, is that he can't just lip service it. If one of his last swings before he became Prime Minister was to say an economic plan, well, we know what the problem is. Either the Bill Shorten version that's been rewarded in the polls, which is bugger the size of the deficit, or you actually have to do something about it, which automatically means you're in the hole that Hockey and Abbott were in.
I asked the question of you all earlier about whether we go to an election. If there's not going to be an election, I agree with you, before the next budget, you ask yourself, do we need a mini budget? You would argue perhaps the crisis isn't that great with a bit of confidence back. The issue about tax reform is easy. They've called an inquiry into tax reform. It's there. He maybe will put things back on the table that Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey foolishly took off the table that could actually raise revenue. So maybe he'll open it up. We've had something like 50 inquiries. We're not short of recommendations and experts who are there. It's a matter of what you do.
It's all about the salesmanship.
It's all about the salesmanship.
Let me bring in Peter Reith for some thoughts on what's been happening, and we're about to hear from Malcolm Turnbull shortly, as you can see on the right of your screen there. But Peter Reith, what do you think, the right call for the Liberal Party, and what does Malcolm Turnbull need to do immediately?
Well, I think it is the right call, quite frankly, because any reasonable person would have to conclude that the chances were that we were going to lose next time round, and there was enough people within the party to say, look, we've got to do something about it. And I think it's actually been a very clean, well-managed coup tonight, and it does give the Liberal Party a chance that I think many people felt that they hadn't had, for some months. As to what's he going to do, well, I think he will be wise to put Scott Morrison in Treasury. I think Julie Bishop's going to be a continuing, significant part of the new government. But I think the other thing that we're going to see from him is, as he said in his speech earlier in the day, he's got to ensure that we have proper process for cabinet deliberation on big issues. And I think if he starts off on that, it's a promise he's made today. If he keeps that promise, I think he'll get off to a pretty firm start.
Yeah, well, and what about some of the key changes here? Some speculation already about who might get the defence portfolio. The Treasury does seem to be pretty well locked up for Scott Morrison, is what we're assuming here. But defence is key if Kevin Andrews doesn't stay. The two things, we've got the white paper due around November. and we've got the subs decision, the key for South Australia, the decision on that.
And we're seeing a tweet just now from the advertiser, Christopher Pyne, Defence Minister, and to deliver the subs for South Australia. Peter Reith.
That's according to the advertiser. Putting
now.
the senior South Australian Christopher Pyne in as Defence Minister, I suppose. What do you think, Peter Reith? You're someone who's held that job. Would that be a good move?
Well, look, it might be. I mean, mind you, Christopher's still got his education stuff he'd like to get through if he could have a chance. Look, I don't think there's going to be any rush overnight. I think it'd be a mistake to rush through to, particular...
All right, let's have a listen now to Malcolm Turnbull, the new Liberal leader, Prime Minister-elect. Turnbull.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. I'm... Julie and I are sorry to keep you up so late. This has been a very important day in the life of the nation, the government, and of course of our party. As you know, the party room a little while ago elected me as leader of the Liberal Party and re-elected Julie as the deputy leader of the Liberal Party. I want to say at the outset what a great debt the nation owes, and the party owes, the government owes, to Tony Abbott, and of course to his family, Margie and their daughters. That the burden of leadership is a very heavy one. Tony's discharged that, leader of the party and of course as Prime Minister, over many years now. And the achievements of the government that he has led have been formidable. The free trade agreements that have been negotiated represent some of the key foundations of our future prosperity, which I'll talk about in a moment. And of course, restoring the security on our borders has been an extraordinarily important step, enabling us, for example, to offer the increased and generous arrangements for Syrian refugees last week. So I want to thank Tony very much indeed for that. Can I just say briefly, as I said, the hour is late, and I want Julie to be able to say something to you as well. This has been a very important, sobering experience today. I'm very humbled by it. I'm very humbled by the great honour and responsibility that has been given to me today. We need to have, in this country, and we will have now, an economic vision, a leadership that explains the great challenges and opportunities that we face, describes the way in which we can handle those challenges, seize those opportunities, and does so in a manner that the Australian people understand, so that we are seeking to persuade rather than seeking to lecture. This will be a thoroughly Liberal government. It will be a thoroughly Liberal government committed to freedom, the individual and the market. It'll be focused on ensuring that in the years ahead, as the world becomes more and more competitive and greater opportunities arise, we are able to take advantage of that. The Australia of the future has to be a nation that is agile, that is innovative, that is creative. We cannot be defensive, we cannot future-proof ourselves. We have to recognise that the disruption that we see driven by technology, the volatility and change, is our friend. Is our friend if we are agile and smart enough to take advantage of it. There has never been a more exciting time to be alive than today. And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian. We will ensure that all Australians understand that their government recognises the opportunities of the future and is putting in place the policies and the plans to enable them to take advantage of it. Now, Julie.
Thank you, and I realise the hour is late. First, I want to congratulate my very dear friend of many years, Malcolm Turnbull, on being voted in as the leader of the Liberal Party. That means he will become the Prime Minister of this country, and I'm confident that he has the passion, the energy and the vision to lead this country at this very challenging time. I thank Tony Abbott for his service as the leader of our party, and particularly for the effort that he put in at the 2013 election, when the Australian people knew they could not afford another moment under the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government. It's a great honour to be elected as the deputy of this party again. I have served as the deputy for 8 years, and I have also, for the last 2 years, had the honour of being Australia's Foreign Minister. I'm excited about continuing to serve as the deputy under Malcolm Turnbull's leadership, and I am thrilled at the prospect of continuing to serve the Australian people as the Foreign Minister. I came into the Liberal Party and came into Parliament because I believed in the values of the Liberal Party, because I believe that they provide the most hope for the most people in this country. And as a believer in the Liberal Party that was created by Robert Menzies, I am firmly of the view that the values and beliefs of the Liberal Party are as relevant today as they were when this great party was formed 70 years ago. In Malcolm Turnbull, we have a leader who will be true to those Menzian values and beliefs, and I'll be honoured to serve this party and this country in my current role.
Mr Turnbull. Yeah, we'll just take a couple of questions because it's so late. Mr Curry.
Mr Turnbull, well, I know it's early days, but is it your intention to serve the full term, or do you think there'll be a need to go to an early election to receive your own mandate as Prime Minister from the people?
My assumption is that the Parliament will serve its full term. Sorry.
Who will your Treasurer be, and do you envisage changes to policy substance as well as leadership style?
There will be, inevitably, there will be changes in ministerial arrangements. I'll be meeting with the Ministry tomorrow morning. I expect ministers will continue in their current position, unless, of course, they choose not to, for the balance of the week, and we'll make ministerial changes after the parliamentary sitting week is over. Now, hang on. Just let me finish. As far as policy changes are concerned, let me just say this. It's not a question of leadership style. There are few things more important in any organisation than its culture. The culture of our leadership is going to be one that is thoroughly consultative. A thoroughly traditional cabinet government that ensures that we make decisions in a collaborative manner. The Prime Minister of Australia is not a president. The Prime Minister is the first among equals, and you can see the partnership between me and Julie, the partnership with our colleagues, will be a very clear cultural demonstration that we are operating in a traditional cabinet manner. And that means, Lenore, that I'm not going to make policy pronouncements from this podium tonight. Of course, policies change; they change all the time. But they will be when people should have the confidence that we will be making decisions in a thoughtful and considered manner, recognising the significance of the work we have to do as the Government of Australia. Sorry, now, please, sure. Yes.
There are only 10 votes in it in the end. There are obviously some in the party that still have reservations about your leadership. How do you change, and what do you say to reassure those people?
Well, the challenge for any leader. So I can't see you. There's a photographer in front. Hello, you're still there. The challenge for any leader and every leader is to ensure that he or she brings together and brings together, in the case of the Liberal Party, the broad church of the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party is the largest, most diverse grassroots political organisation in Australia. Our party room is remarkably diverse, both in terms of people's life experience, their former occupations, and their views on many issues. This is why a culture of engagement, of consultation, of collaboration is so absolutely critical. That is how cabinet governments and parliamentary systems are meant to operate. And Julie and I are determined to ensure that going forward that's how we will operate. Now, we're just going to take one more. Perhaps you... Oh, the West Australian. There you go. Right. There you go. Well, I've got to look after the Deputy Leader.
I'm just on a couple of...
Hang on. Can you guys just let us see Mr. Probert? He's a familiar face, but it's nice to talk to him rather than a lens.
Can I just ask on a couple of the key policy questions? On gay marriage, how will you progress that one? And secondly, on climate change, two of the key doubts, if you will, of your...
Well, let me make this clear. The policy on climate change that Greg Hunt and Julie, in fact, prepared is one that I supported as a minister in the Abbott government, and it's one that I support today. So again, just going back to what Lenore said, policies are reviewed and adapted all the time, but the climate policy is one that is, I think, has been very well designed. That was a very, very good piece of work.
And can I just say, we've already announced our climate targets for Paris in December, and I expect those targets to continue.
What do you say to Australians who might be very confused about what's happened here tonight?
Well, we are a parliamentary system. You know, we are a Westminster system, or Washminster, some political scientists call us. But we're a parliamentary system. And so the leader of any parliamentary party remains leader only so long as he or she has the confidence of the party room. As John Howard always used to say, the leader serves at the pleasure of the party room. And so when the party room makes changes of their mind about that, when they make a judgment such as they've done today, then the leadership can change. And that is inherent. That's one of the characteristics of a parliamentary system, one of the flexibilities that it has over other systems. Can I just really take one more? Fran, there you are.
I tend to ask me to come on the program in the morning, but I'll ask you that later. But you talked a lot about the economic vision, the economic challenges. Joe Hockey took a little offence at that, said you were wrong. Are you talking about the fact that the economic directions were incorrect, or just the capacity to have the conversation and explain it to the people? Are you going to change economic direction, or are you going to change the way you tell the story?
Well, Fran, let me put this to you. In terms of talking about the economy, talking about business, a key element is confidence. And you build confidence by explaining, as I said earlier, explaining what the problem is, making sure people understand it, and then setting out the options for dealing with it. And you've seen in my own portfolio of communications where I've had to deal with very big business problems, whether it's with NBN or indeed with Australia Post. That's the approach I've taken, laying out what the issues are, getting the facts straight, explaining that, and then presenting a path forward and making the case for that path forward. My firm belief is that to be a successful leader in 2015, perhaps at any time, you have to be able to bring people with you by respecting their intelligence in the manner you explain things. Now, you know, if you look at, we've got some great leaders in Australia at state level, but let me just point to one international leader, John Key, for example. John Key has been able to achieve very significant economic reforms in New Zealand by doing just that, by explaining complex issues and then making the case for them. And that is certainly something that I believe we should do. And Julie and I both, as retired advocates, in our own way, are very keen to do that again. Now, the hour is very late. Everyone should go to bed. Thank you very much indeed. Cheerio.
Raised with Joe Hockey in the Cabinet your concerns about...
Well, Malcolm Turnbull and Julie Bishop, he is now Prime Minister-elect, having been endorsed by his party room, and we assume, Kieran, will be sworn in by the Governor-General tomorrow at some point. But a couple of key things to take out of that. It was a pretty good presentation, I thought, from Malcolm Turnbull after what has been a whirlwind day. If you would have thought this morning when they woke up that we'd have a new Prime Minister by the end of the day, well, we do, or we're about to, given the Liberal Party vote. Now, what's he said there? There will be changes to the ministry. He's not going into any of the details, but there will be changes. There'll be a full ministry meeting tomorrow. They'll hold their positions if they want for the rest of this week. Now, we were speculating on this earlier. I don't expect Joe Hockey can front up as Treasurer in question time tomorrow. So ministers might choose to go. You would think maybe the likes of Kevin Andrews, Eric Abetz, those have been so loyal to Tony Abbott and critical of any change, might well resign. But the actual changes to the front bench won't happen until next week, after Parliament has risen, after the Canning by-election. He'll take his time, which is wise, to get it right when it comes to the front bench, because there's already a lot of animosity and right now, tonight, anger in the Liberal Party amongst those who back Tony Abbott. Malcolm Turnbull needs to heal those wounds. Exacerbating that with changes to the front bench will have to be handled very carefully. Policy changes, well, he had the right answer on that too. We need to restore a proper traditional cabinet government, and that means consultation. I don't expect we will see Malcolm Turnbull for quite some time branch out with anything that even smells like a captain's call. He will want to demonstrate as often and as clearly as he can that he is consulting his cabinet on everything he does for at least a while now. Whether that lasts, we'll see, but that's the right thing to say tonight. This is the right way to start his prime ministership. The most interesting thing I thought, and by the way, on policy, he stands by climate change, the policy they've got at the moment. He's not about to change that, he was keen to say. Most interesting thing I thought was when he talked about the Liberal government. Now, he said this is going to be a thoroughly Liberal government focused on freedom, the individual and the market. He is stressing there in this long-running battle between the Conservative forces and the smaller Liberal forces in the government exactly where he stands. It's no surprise. But now, with his first chance as being Prime Minister, where he wants to take this government, a thoroughly Liberal government.
It was an interesting element to it. I think the other element that I found very interesting was, and it wasn't a surprise, we did report this in the hours leading up to the spill, that if he won, he would keep the climate change policy where it was. It's important for many reasons, not the least of which he lost the leadership back in 2009 over that very issue. He's learned a lot in the meantime, in the 6 years since. It was a strong performance from Turnbull, no doubt about it. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the Morrison Treasury position announced before the rest of the ministry, and that he gets sworn in along with the new Prime Minister. It's just my suspicion. I don't think Hockey can show up in question time tomorrow. We know that it's going to end his position as Treasurer. It'll probably happen sooner rather than later, and therefore I think at least in that very pivotal, symbolic underpinning position of Treasury, that we will know that Morrison is Treasurer probably by lunchtime tomorrow.
The other alternative, of course, is for Malcolm Turnbull himself to take the Treasury questions in question time for the rest of this week. Now, I'm sure he won't mind doing that to demonstrate that he can do what he talked about there, explain what the government's doing. Well, first, they really need to work out what they're going to do. If he has been so critical on the economic reform, failures so far, what's he going to do on IR, on tax, to try and get growth going again? And then explain it. And you heard him say there too, the intention is still for the Parliament to run its full term. So he'll have up to a year as Prime Minister before facing the electorate. And I think that's wise as well, and we talked about this before he said it, that's sensible to establish himself as Prime Minister domestically with these reform issues, internationally as well. Plenty of opportunities to do that.
And if we just look at what this is, the conclusion of, well, you know, the start in many respects, but also the journey. He's now, what is it, 60 or 61 years of age. For many, many years, Turnbull's been talked about as a possible future Prime Minister. John Howard urged him to run for the Parliament. He contesting the seat of Wentworth in the first place was opposed by the likes of Peter Costello way back when. This has been a long journey, not without its pitfalls. Has he learned enough? Will he succeed? It's going to be a really interesting ride to watch.
Kieran, I'm going to let you go because I know you've got to be back in a matter of hours hosting our breakfast coverage. But thank you very much for being with us and analysing all of this unfolding. Breaking news, a rather extraordinary night once again in Australian politics and Australian life. It is now 11 p.m. here in Canberra, and if you've just joined us, well, we have a new Prime Minister, or we shortly will, because the Liberal Party room has tonight voted to dump Tony Abbott and replace him with Malcolm Turnbull. 54 to 44 was the outcome, a 10-vote margin there. Malcolm Turnbull will be sworn in, we expect, tomorrow by the Governor-General as Australia's next Prime Minister, ending Tony Abbott's fairly short 2 years in the job. Peter Van Onselen, let me bring you in now for your thoughts on what we just heard from Malcolm Turnbull on some of the things he's going to do, not going to do, the different style he will bring to the job as well.
Yeah, I picked up some of the same things that you did, David. I think the consultative approach was the very pointed way of him trying to differentiate what has been a major internal criticism with the office of Prime Minister under Tony Abbott, and also with the way that he's, I suppose, managed cabinet and managed affairs more generally. That includes a wider criticism, I suppose, in relation to the media often knowing things before the cabinet had signed off on them, or indeed before the party room had had a chance to consider particular policy shifts where the party room, not the cabinet, should be doing that. So Malcolm Turnbull is indicating a big change on that front. Now, we should say he will have to have instituted a big change on the way that he led from opposition to now. I suspect he has done that. His supporters certainly think he has done that, but only time will truly tell us whether he has made those adjustments. But perhaps watching what happened during the Abbott years will help him make that adjustment, but he's signalled that he wants to. I found that comment about a very Liberal government, I would have to say from a unity perspective, concerning. I can understand that he would want to, in a sense, have a sop to some of his supporters, particularly the small L Liberals. But I hope what he really means by that is the tradition of a Liberal government which includes the Conservatives within its ranks. You would have to hope that, because otherwise
he didn't say that,
he's going to have all sorts of
that it would
problems.
be focused on. He stressed there that it was focused on freedom, the individual and the market. Now, yes, you know, they're all great things, but he didn't talk about the Conservative wing of the party and any of that, did he?
No, he didn't, and he needs to be careful on that front, because the Conservatives are a strong force. They wouldn't want to be feeling left out. And by the way, something that we need to touch on here, he's going to lead a Liberal government. Well, what does that say about the coalition government? The National Party will be meeting tomorrow to see what stress tests they put on the coalition arrangement. That is a necessity of this government really going forward. And I tell you what, when you bring the Nationals into it, you bring the Nats into it, and it is not necessarily a Liberal government, it becomes a more Conservative government. We know that. So he needs to be careful on that front. He has to be his own man, he has to be consultative at the same time. But if his definition of a Liberal government is different to what it has been over the decades, that could be an issue. I just want to bring in our panel, if I can. Ross Cameron has joined us up on set. Janine Perrott is obviously still here. Paul Sheehan, well-known Conservative columnist. Maybe I'll start with you on your thoughts about that commentary from the now or the soon-to-be Prime Minister about leading a Liberal government. What do you take from it?
Well, I found it very striking that his use of the term consultative. This was a massive slapdown of Peter Credlin, and Peter Credlin is the root cause of the hollowness of Tony Abbott's government. I formed a view several weeks ago that he was not going to lead, that he was not going to survive, that he would not be the Prime Minister at the next election. It's happened sooner than I imagined. I was stunned by the timing in front of a by-election with Parliament sitting. There's a certain narcissistic element to that. But Julie Bishop loathed Peter Credlin. This is a central fact in this human drama, and she's got her revenge, because the Abbott government was very much the Credlin government. We haven't just lost a Prime Minister, we've lost a Chief of Staff who behaved like a Prime Minister, so they've decapitated them both.
You were out a long time ago on this, talking about Peter Credlin. Do you think that she was a key reason in the downfall of the Prime Minister?
She was the key reason for the insurrection of 39 people who voted a protest vote earlier in the year. Her enemies list was like a phone book. She antagonised half the cabinet, half the backbench. People were jumping ship. Morale was low. This was a terminal prime ministership.
So it wasn't just, I just want to jump in there, it wasn't just Julie Bishop, because people then think that looks like it was a woman against a woman that she brought it down. There was a lot of other people who had
one
the same
enemy too many was Julie Bishop.
Yes, but there are a lot of people who had the same complaints about Peter Credlin. Look, what I found interesting is what we talked about earlier. Remember I said he'll talk about innovation, the new nation, he'll have the vision. That's what's going to be the hallmark, I think, of this Prime Minister.
And a play to the business community too.
Now, we are worried about jobs now, and that's going to be an issue he'll address, but it's takeouts, where we're going to and how to take us there is going to be a very key thing. I thought the other key takeouts were that the government will run its course, that there won't be an election, he seemed to indicate, and obviously who the Treasurer. Those are the questions when people wake up tomorrow, they're going to want to know. Am I going to have to go to an election? Who's the Treasurer?
Ross Cameron?
I basically agree with all of that. I think that Paul is right, that a government is like an organism or a machine, that it has a certain architecture to it. And when, as Prime Minister, you seek to change pretty fundamentally that architecture by outsourcing a significant chunk of the executive authority of a government to a staff member, you subvert the natural currents of the organism. And so if we talk about Julie Bishop, I don't regard it as a sort of a female against a female thing. I regard it as a deputy leader versus a staff member. And at key moments in the life of the government, Julie Bishop, for example, when Tony Abbott was going to give the address to the press conference, which was ramped up before the last challenge as being a critical moment for him, Julie Bishop flew back from overseas, she got off the plane, she rang Tony Abbott and she said, Tony, if you want my input, this is a big speech for the government, if you want some input, and Tony was like, no, I only really have one advisor. And then he gave a speech which was sort of 65% of what it needed to be. Now, I am going to go to my grave with a lot of affection in my heart towards Tony Abbott. I think I loved the fact that Malcolm opened with a recitation of Tony's undisputed credentials. Tony Abbott will not leave politics, whenever that may take place, as without credentials. Stopping the boats, as we have seen in the Mediterranean, all over Europe now, promising to stop the boats and then stopping them, was a very significant logistical achievement. Now, if the government had have continued on that path of practical problem solving, it would have been a marvellous thing. They did achieve 3 major free trade agreements. That's significant. Joe Hockey says they are creating jobs faster than their predecessor did. But there was this kink in the hose, which meant that the government could never really get the lift-off required. And so to be in a situation where you're trailing Labor by a significant margin when Labor is led by Bill Shorten, regrettably, that was not going to fly.
Let me jump in. Michael Kroger, can I go to you? How do you think that Malcolm Turnbull now has to bridge this really delicate divide between, on the one hand, giving appropriate praise to the outgoing Prime Minister, the person that, let's face it, most Liberal Party members favour, or at least up till now have favoured above Malcolm Turnbull, at the same time as making the case, which Labor didn't make, if we recall, back in 2010, about exactly why it was that you needed to change the Prime Ministership? It's a tough thing.
Look, it's a very good question, but in the Rudd-Gillard era on that night in June 2010, the explanation of that a good government lost its way, and as you know, Peter, it never got beyond that. And everyone thought, well, what does that mean? And they were never able to explain that. He was a popular Prime Minister. So that was one of the great, the oranges of her defeat were what happened that night. And Paul Howes and many others have said that. But I think it's a different situation here, and it's for the following reason. Even though Abbott will go down as a great Liberal Prime Minister whose government had great achievements, the criticism of Tony and Joe, rightly or wrongly, is that they weren't able to convince the public that those achievements were great achievements. And so for Malcolm and for Julie and for Scott Morrison, who will undoubtedly become Treasurer, I think it's fair to say these people are better communicators than Tony and Joe. I'm sorry to say that. The camera likes them better. They have more sting in their message. They have more notches on their belt. They are better communicators. You know, like if that hurts, it hurts. Tony is many great things, but he's not the most articulate leader. And Joe wasn't able to convince the public of his achievements. So it's more style and substance is the long way of answering your question, because I think Hockey was right tonight when he spoke about the achievements of his government. Of course, he was upset with Malcolm. We all know that. That happens in the heat of the moment. Hockey's achievements are very, very considerable, and they are Abbott's achievements as well. So I think in many respects it's selling a message better, as simplistic as that sounds. Boy, the Abbott government has a long record of achievements.
Well, let me bounce off that and ask you, Peter Reith. You've just heard Michael Kroger there talking about the need for better salesmanship and the belief that the new team, if you like, particularly what we assume will be the finance team with Scott Morrison and the new Prime Minister, now the Prime Minister-elect, I suppose, Malcolm Turnbull, has been better salesmen. But you know as well as anyone, as someone who has been passionate about further reform, the next step, if you like, beyond what this government has already done, whether you think it's good, great or average, has been crucial. Do you see Malcolm Turnbull as that man, that Prime Minister, with perhaps a reshuffle around it, Peter Reith, that will see them do the sorts of reforms that you did, quite frankly, in the first term of the Howard government?
Well, I certainly think it's a much better prospect, and there's one thing I disagree with Michael on this. This was not wasn't really an issue about communication. I mean, that's part of it, obviously, but I mean, the truth of the matter is, and I'm sorry to say it, but it's just a fact, and that is going all the way back to, prior to the 2013 election, neither Tony or Joe, although perhaps with some exceptions with Joe, quite frankly, neither of them really had a grasp over where they were going to go on the economics. And that was very clear in the first budget, because in one breath they were saying we're short of $1, etc., 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 and in the next breath they're announcing a $20 billion medical facility, for example. So there was a confusion about their objective, and quite frankly, I think their economic management, in a way, has been, part of their failings and led to today's big change. And let's face it, in the end, what does a coalition government have to really prioritise? And that is economic management. And the Abbott government, on three big issues: tax, workplace relations, federal-state relations, they themselves have had to admit effectively by their own hand that all that they've been able to do so far is to get some reports done with still no idea of what they'd actually do.
David Spears, sorry to interrupt, Peter Reith. I just wanted to bring David Spears in and let him know and let our viewers know that I've had it communicated to me from the Prime Minister's office, the outgoing Prime Minister's office, that is, Tony Abbott, that he is not planning to speak this evening.
No, that's right. We won't be hearing from Tony Abbott tonight. You can understand, how awkward, how difficult, how, well, excruciating in many ways tonight must be. And, I was speaking to someone a little earlier in the Prime Minister's office, not a staff member, but someone who is in there commiserating with them all, and a very, very tough night in this situation for all of them. But for Tony Abbott particularly. Let me just quickly give you a look at what some of the reaction has been amongst Liberal MPs leaving the building here after the party room decision tonight, starting with Bronwyn Bishop.
Months, how do you think tonight will impact on the party's chances?
Well, I think the party room has made its decision, and now we all have to work hard to make sure that we stay in office, that Bill Shorten does not get elected.
Is it the right call?
Well, the party room has made its decision.
Are you disappointed? Tony Abbott was a very close ally of yours. Is he still?
Well, the party...
So does this mean that with the Nationals, that the agreements with the Liberal Party may have to be renegotiated?
I'm sure it will need to be renegotiated, yes.
And are people in the bush happy to have Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister?
Look, we'll just have to see what they think about that. My main concern is my electorate, and, we're very much behind the Northern Australia plan, and that's what I'm fighting for. So, obviously, we're going to have to renegotiate with that and see what happens from here.
See what happens. That's not necessarily a vote of confidence in Malcolm Turnbull, though.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see what sort of Prime Minister Malcolm is.
What did you think of the result tonight?
I thought it was decisive, and it's going to be good for the country.
And do you think the party can fall behind Malcolm Turnbull now?
Of course they will. You saw the results, and even those who were still supporting the previous Prime Minister have understood that it's about combined effort, moving forward, and we just cannot anticipate what disasters would befall us if Labor got back into power.
Is it time for another election now?
No.
Why is that?
Well, some of the MPs leaving. Let me show you some of the newspapers that are going to be hitting the stands tomorrow. Their take on all of this, starting with the Daily Telegraph in Sydney. They've gone with highlighting the fact that yet another serving Prime Minister has been replaced midway through their term. Malcolm knifes Tony to win 54-44 in party room vote to become our 5th PM in 5 years. Turnstile, as they list there, Rudd, Gillard, Rudd, and now Abbott, 2 years into his term. I think we also have the West Australian newspaper. We've got a few newspapers we're going to have a look at. Let's have a look at that. The West Australian newspaper. New PM, a far more positive take on Malcolm Turnbull taking over as Prime Minister. Turnbull defeats Abbott 54-44 in leadership challenge. And the Herald Sun, the stablemate, News Corp stablemate of the Daily Telegraph in Melbourne. Here's what the Herald Sun has gone for on their front page tomorrow. PM Malcolm 54-44. Abbott axed after just 2 years. New direction promised for nation. Again, a more positive take. We'll see some of the other front pages tomorrow. I just want to go to the panel and more specifically focus now on the challenges Malcolm Turnbull will face, not so much in the broad sense of the direction of the party, but with some of the key policy challenges he's going to have to face in the next couple of months. Submarines is a big one, balancing the political interests in South Australia against what's best for our nation's defences, as well as what we can afford. Paul Sheehan, we'll get to tax in a moment, but what are your thoughts on whether Malcolm Turnbull will go in a different direction than Tony Abbott on this one?
Well, he's going to have to start doing some reforms because Tony Abbott was not a reforming Prime Minister. He made some panicking comments before the last election, broke some promises, but the government is weighed down with about 30 significant reports and not very much action. I think that Malcolm doesn't have a very high bar to jump over when it comes to becoming a reforming Prime Minister in the next 12 months.
Peter Reith, I'm just keen on your thoughts on the submarines one in particular, because it is a tough one for who. Okay, Peter Reith's not there. Let me bring in Ross Cameron then. Your thoughts on? No? Okay. Who have we got there? Michael Kroger.
I'm ready to go,
Ross,
but I would always defer to Michael if he's available.
No.
Well,
Ross, have a crack at that one. What do you reckon?
I am deeply disappointed in Nick Xenophon, who is basically holding a gun to the government's head and saying that as a populist he is going to demand an $80 billion subsidy to a poorly performing economy in South Australia via this defence contract. Now, I am just saying that we cannot afford the promises that successive administrations have made. And we've got a level of compassion among our national leadership which is not matched by their bank balance. And so they are continuing to look for proxies for their compassion, but sending the bill to unborn Australians who will be labouring under debt for generations. Now, I want to see a government that gives us a credible path back to a credible balance sheet. And this business of just racking every time you see a human problem, promise another several $100 million government program to fix it, has got to end. And I am optimistic. I'm hopeful that a combination, let's say we wind up with Turnbull, Bishop, Morrison, I think that I am quite hopeful about the next election, but I accept the government is going to have to make some tough decisions, and submarines we've got to come to a landing that we can pay for.
Well, Janine, on the GST then, I mean, tax reform, I suppose, is the big one that he's pointing to, Malcolm Turnbull, when he says we haven't done enough on economic reform. Easier said than done, though. Yes, you can say we need to explain, we need to have the conversation, and they need to do that a lot better than they did under Tony Abbott, but you're still going to have entrenched opposition to any change on whatever tax it is. The GST is the big one here. It's still going to be a tough battle when you've got the Labor Party absolutely opposed to any increase.
Well, it is, but he can actually, as I said, go back to the original tax reform debate, look at everything, put everything back in the mix that have been ruled out, make a lot of effort there, and do a whole package here. And if we do get to that issue of a GST, which should be in the context of a whole lot of other things and looking at it, if we did, that is going to be a very hard sell, and the argument would be he is going to be a better person, or the new team will be better at selling it. But I think there's a lot more they can do in this area, in the whole tax reform, multinational tax reform, super tax reform, negative union, things that have been ruled out or that hadn't really been done, that Malcolm, and he will be well aware of it. This is a man who worked in a merchant bank. He knows how international finance works. He should be able to look at it and see other areas where they can talk reform and talk what business needs to hear. Sometimes maybe they just have to, you have to make the noises at the moment. Both sides are going to be making noises, and he's just got to look like when he does get a decision, when he does get something to sell, he can sell it.
Can I just jump in, David, at the risk of hogging the microphone? I mean, I am delighted that the three tension issues with the left, if we say climate change, gay marriage and the Republic, it seems to me we've already kind of reached a landing there which everyone can live with on the Conservative side. And so I'm very pleased to see those issues sort of cauterised. Then you've had Malcolm, in his acceptance speech, he did make an interesting reference to John Key, the New Zealand leader. And he had two elements to that. One is this recognition that a government must engage in an act of persuasion to draw over the non-committed in the middle. We have to get 50% plus one to win an election. And John Key has gone out and sort of honestly laid out the problems and sought to take the public into his trust. Turnbull, I think, is naturally, that's where Kroger says correctly, he is more of a communicator, he's more willing to engage in that dialogue. But the other point, there are some policy things that we can do which are not going to startle the horses. For example, Mike Baird has just come out and committed himself to 10 priorities which are measurable. And one of the reasons why I will never be a left-winger is that they are always attached to every symbolic gesture where the benefits cannot be measured. So long as it costs a huge amount of money and you can't measure the benefit, the left will be all over it. So there's a whole range of things which are measurable. And Key is the master of setting out what those real accountability measures are. Mike Baird is following in his path, and Malcolm Turnbull, happily from my standpoint, looks like he's going to get on board that trend.
Peter, let me just come back to something pretty fundamental in all of this. Tony Abbott hasn't actually put out a statement or said anything yet that he is resigning as Prime Minister. Now, he will. I don't think there's much doubt about this, but the point's been made to me by someone who was rather intimately involved in the Labor leadership changes that immediately after the party room vote, Kevin Rudd and then a couple of years later, Julia Gillard did put out a statement making it very clear they were resigning as Prime Minister, so that technically the Governor-General the next day can swear in the new Prime Minister. And the Governor-General can't do that, of course, until Tony Abbott has actually formally resigned. Now, I'm not doubting that he will, but it hasn't come yet.
Look, I think I've been as hard on Tony Abbott as anyone over the last 12 months, but I think that's just a matter of time, David. I'm not too concerned about that. See it as an oversight in the heat of the moment, which, for me at least, is entirely understandable given what he's gone through tonight. I'm sure they will get that rectified. The issue for me is how he goes pacifying sections of the Conservative base that might be upset, particularly in the commentariat, if he feels that that's even his job as the outgoing Prime Minister to do that in some sections that are going to be upset about this. As for Malcolm Turnbull, I absolutely think that what he will do is take that sort of management consultant approach, the Mike Baird, the Keys approach from New Zealand, be very methodical in a business sense. Can he do that, though, with what has happened, as opposed to the way that it happened in New Zealand? And I guess it was a lesser version with what happened with Mike Baird, where he was successful. And can he do it on a national level as opposed to a state level like Mike Baird? But then there are two things, David, that I think are absolutely pivotal here. The first one is the transaction cost. I've been writing a couple of times that I didn't think the Liberal Party should risk going down this path because of that transaction cost, the ever underestimated transaction cost of changing leaders and what it might result in. That's a real problem. The other one, in the policy sense, you know, the way that Malcolm Turnbull is going to be judged is if he is seen to be correcting the economic space. You heard what he said when he gave that media conference when he announced that he was challenging, very pointed in suggesting that he doesn't agree with the direction that things have gone. He has to therefore make a sharp turn. Now, can he do that in a meaningful way that can be translated into KPIs that he can meet, key performance indicators, with the way growth is? Growth is so anemic, global growth, not just our domestic growth. He needs a bit of luck on the economic front to go with any changes that he might make. And all of that sits irrespective of the crossbench, where he's probably not going to be able to make legislative changes anyway. He'll probably be better dealing with the crossbench based on some of his relationships there and some of what they've even said during the course of the day. But ultimately, the best show he's got is to set out a blueprint for the next election, take a deep breath and hope that he can sell it. And then if he's lucky enough to get re-elected despite all these transaction costs, then can he implement it with a mandate?
You talk about the reaction of the commentariat. One of the things, David, is going to be interesting, which I can tell you the media companies are lining up for, is media reform. It's something that Tony Abbott put on the back burner. Malcolm Turnbull was very keen to do. One of the reasons Tony Abbott didn't want to do it is he didn't want to give Malcolm Turnbull that victory, I guess, to get one up. It is a difficult one, but I think Malcolm thinks he can do it. I think he does. He's dealt with all these people. That might be a way, I might be being cynical here, but he might be able to deal with a few media proprietors on this level, and it might be interesting to see where that leaves the debate. I don't say it's a first order issue, but it is something they are certainly believing. They are under the impression if Malcolm got to be PM, they were going to get some media reform.
Let's also say, I mean, we are looking at the moment at a situation where the Liberal Democratic Party is going to preference Labor in the seat of Canning. Now, that is a failure. It is a failure on our side. And when you talk to David Leyonhjelm, he will tell you that he has had virtually no personal contact with the, quote, PMO whatsoever. He will tell you that very, very senior figures in the PMO will walk past him in the corridor and will refuse to acknowledge his existence. Now, this is not the behaviour of a professionally run operation that wishes to win elections. So I want to see the whole of the coalition reaching out in bonds of affection, of understanding, of looking for mutual interests with those 8 crossbenchers who we all know have such a significant role to play in our Commonwealth.
Now, I just got a couple of other front pages I'm just going to throw in the mix here. The Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, the Fairfax Press. Let's start with the Sydney Morning Herald. The coup they've gone for in their front page splash on the change from Tony Abbott to Malcolm Turnbull, as you can see there. Turnbull ousts Abbott 54-44, and a great picture there too to accompany that. And the Age in Melbourne, let's take a look at that. What have they gone for?
Malcolm in the muddle.
All right, so...
Oh, dear.
Can't quite on my television screen read the text of that, but...
it's Malcolm in the muddle.
A lengthy explanation of something. Yeah. No, I got that bit. It was the rest that I'm struggling with underneath. All right, so the different takes on what's happened tonight in the Liberal Party. But if you have just tuned in, well, we've got a new Prime Minister, or we soon will, after the Liberal Party have voted to get rid of Tony Abbott 2 years into his term. Makes him the shortest serving Prime Minister since Harold Holt. Only 2 years in the job after a very successful stint as opposition leader. Didn't translate for the various reasons we've been going through. You saw off that spill back in February where there was no challenger. This time, though, it was a very stealthy operation indeed, kept under tight wraps. This move that was brought on this afternoon and executed perfectly, really. I mean, yes, the margin may not be as big as Malcolm Turnbull had hoped for, but a 10-vote margin is big enough. Paul Sheehan, I mean, if it had been much tighter than that, we would have been talking about the divisions that remain, but 10 votes, I suppose, is enough. He will still have to do something, though, about the Conservative wing of the party, not to mention the Nats. And just reflecting on what we heard from Malcolm Turnbull earlier in his press conference, his brief press conference, there wasn't a lot in there about reaching out to that Conservative wing of the party. I mean, how do you see this playing out?
Well, that's just one of the, as Peter said, the many moving parts. He's only got about 10 months to do a lot. And you're going to see class warfare break out big time now. You've got the Labor Party's already been running class warfare against a knockabout Prime Minister. What do you think they're going to do to the Point Piper plutocrat? I mean, there's a big dirt file on Malcolm Turnbull, which wasn't used because he got knocked off. He's never had to face an election with Labor, and Labor play a dirty game. And there is a lot of dirt running around on Malcolm Turnbull. I've got a lot of it. I won't use it. Most of it's scurrilous, but I don't think Labor's going to be quite so punctilious about this. So you're going to see class warfare breaking out, and Malcolm's going to have to defend the China Free Trade Pact. Bill Shorten has been a complete dud as leader, but it just shows you how unsuccessful Tony Abbott was, that Shorten was travelling very well in the polls.
Well, can Malcolm Turnbull, do more to bring Bill Shorten back down to earth? I mean, do you expect he will be better or worse than Tony Abbott in terms of taking it up to his opponent?
I think he'll be much, much better, because I know Tony Abbott and he's a good bloke. He's got a golden heart, but he's not a very good communicator. He had the Julia Gillard problem. Julia Gillard was a really good communicator. Then she became Prime Minister and turned robotic. Exactly the same thing happened to Tony Abbott, but for a different reason. It's because Peter Credlin was micromanaging his Prime Ministership, which made him inauthentic. And this inauthenticity, I think, is the root cause of, or one of the root causes for his failure to break through, cut through with the electorate. The electorate wasn't buying what Tony was selling.
Can I say, David, something really important, I think, with Malcolm Turnbull is who he gets around him, not just his staff, but also key lieutenants around him that he considers the inner sanctum. I realise that he's talking about cabinet government, so he has to be genuinely consultative with a larger cohort, but every government still does need, you don't want to call it a kitchen cabinet, that's a jinx, but you still do need the leadership team, if you like, and some of those close confidants, the whip, the cabinet secretary.
So who are going to be the...
Well...
Can I throw in...
Who are going to be the big winners here? When you look at who backed him in tonight as well, and some of those figures that were there and around him, I mean, Simon Birmingham, he's a good performer for the government.
He won't go into cabinet.
And someone who you would...
I don't think.
Well, I wouldn't... Well, I don't know. I wouldn't rule it out.
David,
depending on how widespread the changes are. Yep, Paul?
David, Scott Morrison is absolutely central. You can talk about all the moves that he's going to make, but having Scott Morrison as Treasurer and having Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister, that is a 1-2 punch.
I think that's exactly right. And look, what's going to happen here, there's going to be optics changes and competency attached to that. He will want to show generational change, so he will do that. Someone like a Christian Porter, you would think, would go rocketing up. Kelly O'Dwyer, she ticks the gender box as well as the generational box. Maurice Payne and Michaelia Cash, I would think, would both go into cabinet with new positions, and straight away, presto, he's got 4 women in cabinet, matching, I think, as many as has ever been, unless I'm forgetting a particular government. So certainly as many as ever been in the Liberals when they've been in government. So those sort of changes are important, but Paul's exactly right. What will decide the rise and fall of this government, as long as they get those things right and as long as they run a consultative government, are the performance of the Prime Minister in Malcolm Turnbull and the performance of the new Treasurer, assuming we're right, and it goes to Scott Morrison. And the only thing I'd add as a third to that is how Julie Bishop then manages the relationship between the new Prime Minister, who she is very close to personally, with the backbench, and there'll be others that are in the mix that will be in the mix that will help ensure that Malcolm Turnbull lives by what he says he will live by.
And just on the point you're both making about the Treasurer, it is a key, because we saw where you have a weak Treasurer and obviously a weak Prime Minister where it didn't work. They have to have a good relationship. Now, we're all talking about Scott Morrison being politically expedient for him. It's going to not be easy for Scott Morrison. He's a strong person. Malcolm thinks he is the smartest guy in the room, and he is a business person. He would think he's going to know more about Treasury than Scott Morrison.
Well, he does.
Going to be, I know. So it's going to be a very interesting dynamic with Turnbull as Prime Minister having to give up to Scott Morrison, and that is going to be a very key relationship. He's got to manage well.
And Ross, the other thing is a lot of Liberals, even fans of Scott Morrison, say that he hasn't really been tested. Now, I think that's a bit ridiculous at one level. I was about to say, I think at one level that's ridiculous, because in what was the greatest test for this government, he succeeded. You know what's the second biggest test for this government, though, is now fixing the budget and instituting economic reform. It's a more complex change insofar as it's a different cell. You know, the boats one, he almost looked like he was purpose-built for that. We're about to find out, is that because he made himself purpose-built for it and can now shift gears, or is it because that's his dimension? If that's his dimension, Ross Cameron, it's not the right dimension for Treasurer. He has to shift gears.
Yeah, well, I think these are the 2 biggest unanswered questions. And I think it is quite possible that this could become a great Australian government. I think Malcolm Turnbull has got questions to answer. Okay, and those questions are, Malcolm has behaved at times as if he has an only child syndrome, that he is not conscious of the impact of his behaviours on a range of people around him, He's presented to us tonight as being a fully collegiate human being, and there's no question in my mind that he is the most naturally gifted person in that federal coalition. Julie Bishop is a very gifted person, but I think Malcolm has the most natural leadership gifts. But the question is, temperament-wise, has he gone from being the sort of genius-only child to being a truly collaborative creature? And so the second point for Malcolm is he going to govern from Point Piper or from, as I would prefer, Parramatta? And we want the spirit of Parramatta in the government of Malcolm Turnbull.
Says the former member for Parramatta. There's also going to be, I think, an issue of issues or expectation management for Malcolm Turnbull from the left and the centre. We now have, for the first time, a Prime Minister and Opposition Leader in favour of a Republic, a Prime Minister and Opposition Leader in favour of same-sex marriage. Are we going to see movement on that in the rest of this term of Parliament?
I think we'll see a plebiscite in this term. I think we will see a plebiscite this side of the next election on same-sex marriage. The indication from the Turnbull camp was very much that he would stick to the plebiscite, and that's what the backbench wants. Yep. But I would be surprised if he doesn't do it this side of the election.
Why not save $100 million and do it with the election if it's only in 10 months and stop people going back and it costing a fortune?
Well, that's an option.
Well, maybe that's an alternative too.
But the issue is, I don't think people will care, David. I mean, all these issues, gay marriage, the Republic, climate change, Indigenous reconciliation is the one which is still unresolved.
I think you find people might care more about those than some of the arcane tax debates, that we might be focused on. I think mind for a broad sweep of the electorate, there's a lot of people focused on it.
Look, I think you get more tolerance from the right for those issues if the right's agenda, which is economic, which is a recognition that a nation's future depends on its balance sheet.
They're the ones that shifted towards him. Scott Ryan's, Mitch Fifields, these are sort of notional members of the right, the old-fashioned Victorian right, where they define themselves by economics, not social issues. They're the people that really got in behind him, and they're going to expect to see Malcolm Turnbull deliver in spaces that they feel that the Liberal Party hasn't done under Tony Abbott.
Which we have to do. We have to accept that if you're going to deliver economic reform, you have to create an environment amongst the mums and dads where there's a recognition of the need for it. I mean, Vladimir Putin has just been out there, in the midst of a civil war in Syria. He is going all guns blazing to secure a massive gas deal, which will immeasurably strengthen Russia's economic capacity. We are whinging about Chinese influence on Sydney property prices. I'm just telling you, if you've got several $1 trillion in cash sitting on your balance sheet because of the productivity of your citizens, that is going to express itself one way, whether it's in Sydney property prices or getting kids into the best schools or whatever the hell it is. Chinese influence will follow its economic power. And we can't imagine there is any way around that. And that's why Malcolm's message is absolutely right. We cannot fear the fact that the world is changing. We must make change our friend. We must back our own innovation. We must get the state out of the way, and we must give the private sector the opportunity to lift this economy on life support. That's where the power is. That's what John Key has discovered.
Well, just on you raise an interesting point there too about where does Malcolm Turnbull stand on the big picture foreign policy challenge, balancing the United States and China. One, our greatest military ally, the other, our biggest trading partner now, and this free trade agreement debate going on at the moment. Does Malcolm Turnbull, compared to Tony Abbott, where does he sit on that spectrum, if it is indeed a spectrum? I mean, is he going to be more pro-American than Tony Abbott, or less so? Ross, what do you think?
Well, I think he's got to be heavily pro-American on the economic questions, but I will confess to you that I have had a complete loss of confidence in Barack Obama on the foreign policy questions. I think he's made a total hash of it. I think if we want to stop the refugees, if we want to deal with the humanitarian crisis we are facing, whatever language you choose, you've got to stop the war. And the only way to stop the war is to do a deal with Russia and China, and almost certainly Iran, not necessarily the nuclear deal that people are talking about, but we have to create a coalition which isolates IS. And everything else is irrelevant. We have to make strange bedfellows. We have to get that job done.
Just on the issue of his American, where he sits on America, David, the Australian-American Leadership Dialogue was on only a few weeks ago. I went to that. Malcolm Turnbull was there with his wife Lucy, and that's another issue we should talk about. She's a very important advisor, I would say, to him, and key role she will play. But he was obviously, he's always been a supporter of that. He worked for an American merchant bank. I don't think his pro-American credentials are in question, yet he's also been for innovation and done a lot with China. So I don't think anything will change on that at all, to be honest.
David, on one point, just an interesting human point, Malcolm Turnbull's son is fluent in Mandarin, and well, last I heard, he was based in Hong Kong or in China doing merchant banking with the Chinese. Well, I mean, that tells you a lot about Malcolm Turnbull and his family. I think he'll be a much more supple, quite supple and dexterous in dealing with the China-America issue.
Exactly.
And his son-in-law, I think, James Brown's a pretty well-known commentator at the Lowy Institute on foreign policy. So, there's plenty of advisors in the family, not just Lucy Turnbull, on these sort of things. I want to touch on some other key figures. Now, Peter Dutton and Matthias Cormann. I'm not as critical as Richo was a little earlier tonight about the sort of people who are being sent out. Some of them, yes, not startling performers, but those two are pretty solid performers, notwithstanding the gaffe from Peter Dutton the other day. But well, Peter Van Onselen, to you on this. I mean, what do you think? Matthias Cormann, Peter Dutton, they're not exactly going to be dumped, but what's in the future? What's in store for them, do you think, under a Turnbull Prime Ministership?
Look, I certainly think at the very least both of them need to stay in cabinet. There's an argument because of recent gaffes, I suppose, particularly on Friday, that Peter Dutton might fall into a junior ministry, but I think that would be a mistake, particularly because he's an important and senior figure in the right. Now, look, Malcolm Turnbull might not see eye to eye with him, but I think it would send the wrong message to be dumping Peter Dutton into the outer ministry, or worse. He's not seen as somebody that's on the way out, far from it. He's been touted as a future leader in years gone by, although that might have waned. Matthias Cormann, I think Matthias Cormann would want to hang on to the finance portfolio. You can bet on that. He enjoys his work there.
Absolutely.
I think he's a good chance of hanging on to the finance portfolio for the sort of continuity, I suppose, of the system. The risk for him there would be an Arthur Sinodinos, you would think, but there might be another role for him. He will certainly move back onto the front bench somewhere. But Matthias Cormann...
In the cabinet, do you reckon?
Well, that would be a big call, but I think it probably should happen.
We are still awaiting that ICAC
if
report.
Not, well, yeah, and the ICAC report, maybe that's a reason to make him cabinet secretary. But one way or the other, you need Arthur Sinodinos with an eyeball or two eyeballs on cabinet. But look, there's no doubt in my mind that there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that Matthias Cormann stays in cabinet. There's no doubt in my mind that he should stay in finance. There's no doubt in my mind that Peter Dutton should stay in cabinet. But there is a risk that he falls out of it, but that would be a mistake in my view.
What about our guy, Christian Porter? He'd be a brilliant finance minister.
He should, well, I think he'd be better in legal affairs. I mean, obviously George Brandis isn't going anywhere. He was, as I understand it, one of the key backers of Malcolm Turnbull in this, so I don't see him getting demoted as Attorney General. But I think...
What about Josh Frydenberg then, someone who did come out very publicly in support of Tony Abbott? I mean, he's he's a rising star still, I would suggest, and someone who is the future of the party at one point.
It would send a good message to promote him. It would send a very good message to promote him, but at the very least he can't be demoted. But Christian Porter, as Paul Sheen says, he has to go up. It's a matter of where he goes up. He could fill any portfolio. I mean, quite frankly,
get some women in there too. You've got to get some more women in there.
Well, you are going to get women in there, no doubt about that. I mean, you're particularly going to get women moving from those junior ranks into cabinet. The issue, the challenge for the new Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, when he gets sworn in, or when the current Prime Minister issues a statement so that we can confirm that he is moving on.
We still don't have that.
No, we don't. Well, look, I don't have a problem with the statement. I do have more of a problem with him not fronting the cameras tonight, actually. I know that might sound harsh because of what he'd be going through, but quite frankly, I can't think of an example where something like this has happened and we haven't heard from a serving Prime Minister who's been ousted, or even an opposition leader, quite frankly, that's been ousted. Even Mark Latham issued a statement. But anyway, that I think is an issue.
Another one in the mix. Sorry, I keep interrupting you, but Warren Truss. I mean, I know he's in the National Party, he's a Nationals leader. Does this bring on, because we know that he very publicly went out for, obvious reasons to declare that the coalition agreement would have to be renegotiated, should they change, expressing his clear support for Tony Abbott. Does he now take the opportunity to bow out?
Well, if he does, it would be, you would presume, for Barnaby Joyce, unless there was a massive shift to someone unexpected like a Darren Chester. But of course, then he had a different view to most of his colleagues on same-sex marriage. He's only a parliamentary secretary. That would seem surprising as well. So, look, the National Party, their first and foremost decision tomorrow is what they do on the coalition agreement. Here's my prediction, though. I don't think the National Party will step out of the coalition, but I do think they will see this as their opportunity to be a bit more bullish in the coalition, almost a version of what the WA Nats do as outsiders in the coalition who support a Liberal government. They might be a bit more pushy, the National Party, from here, and frankly, for their party, that would be in their interest, but it's an early awkwardness if that happens for Tony Abbott, for Malcolm Turnbull, and also it's an awkwardness when he's playing to economic right-wingers in the Liberal Party, because the Nats, of course, don't take the same view as that, Ross.
Well, it is. While Richo was dismissive of the suggestion, I did learn two things from my friend John Ruddick, whose book draft I have been reading on every change in Liberal leadership since Menzies was elected Prime Minister under the UAP. And he does make the point that the Nationals did in fact choose a Liberal leader at one stage when they refused to go into coalition. I'm pretty sure it was Snedden who they rejected, but I might have that wrong. Larry Anthony's old man sat in a room, 3 National Party boys, and decided who the Liberal Prime Minister was going to be. But the other point that John Ruddick's book will make is that both Liberal Party's 2 greatest leaders, Menzies and Howard, had a first failed attempt at party leadership. So Menzies' first experience, forgotten by most, as a UAP Prime Minister, he suffered terrible bad luck. The Second World War started and he failed and was rejected by the people, came back to become Australia's, without any question, greatest Prime Minister. And then in John Howard, we likewise had a Liberal Party leader who failed in an election, was sent away, was regarded. Christopher Pyne told him when Howard called seeking his support, he said, John Howard, you are a failure, you are yesterday's man, you are wasting your time talking to me. And look what happened. So a failure in the past for Malcolm Turnbull. My point is, for Malcolm Turnbull, it could well be the thing that makes him into a great Prime Minister. Now, who are we talking about?
Well, here's a prediction for you, David Spears. Here's a prediction for you. Like, Malcolm Turnbull only just won this, but he didn't have anyone come out on his side publicly. Does that make him feel freer to make more wholesale changes than he otherwise might have? Obviously, he needed all their support behind the scenes. There were certainly 2 schools of thought that were put to me earlier when the suggestion was that this was happening. One was that Malcolm Turnbull will be constrained depending on the way it unfolds. The other one was that he might feel less constrained on the way it unfolds. My question mark about this, what do you think, David, is he less constrained because no one came out on his side, or does he realise that there were all sorts of deal-making, presumably, that happened behind the scenes?
I think he's less constrained because of this. I think the mystery around who exactly did what, and we got a fair idea about some of them did, but maintaining as much public mystery as you can is great, because it doesn't look like when he promotes someone, it's because of a deal that's been cut. He's paying them back for the support that they brought to him in the leadership sense. Now, that may well be part of the transaction that's going on here, but it's not playing out as publicly. We can't say, for example, oh, he's given such and such the job because of what he said in the hours leading up to the party room ballot. It gives him, I think, more scope to make the changes the government needs to the front bench. And as we've all discussed, one of Tony Abbott's big problems, he was largely stuck through loyalty to the front bench that he inherited, bar a few changes along the way. This is an opportunity for Malcolm to make some wholesale changes, put more women in, put some fresher faces in, and really sharpen up the economic attack in particular.
I agree with all of that, and I think Malcolm has a terrific problem that, in truth, I'm not just selling this to you as hyperbole, that the Liberal backbench is bristling with genuine talent. And that is a good problem for Malcolm Turnbull to have. And I think too often political parties are like the Australian cricket team, where once you kind of get in, it's very, very hard to get sacked no matter how you perform. And I would like to see the Liberal Party, which is meant to be a merit-based party, be more porous and, in truth, be more willing to replace the non-performing minister with the ambitious, bristling, energetic young talent. The only other point I will make to you on the former question is that Barnaby Joyce is apparently hawking around a list of the National Party's policy requests, which says to me that they're ready to do a deal with this new government. One of them is that water should be moved out of the Department of the Environment and into the Department of Agriculture. So that will be one of the first policy tests that Malcolm will face.
And water was a big issue of Malcolm's in the Howard government. He did a lot on water.
He has very strong views on water as the former guy leading it. He's thought to be opposed to this suggestion from the National Party, but Barnaby is running it strongly.
Paul Sheehan, a lot of challenges for the new Prime Minister in Malcolm Turnbull. On the foreign policy front, we talked a bit about China and the US, but Indonesia too. We've seen some improvement, but gee, it has a long way to go and is important for many, the reasons that you've written about and the rest of us know of. I mean, what do you think about where Malcolm Turnbull is going to take us in an international sense?
Well, I think he's, in international negotiations, I think he's a sophisticated cosmopolitan man. He's a businessman with international experience. I think he's got a big plus there. And the first critical column I wrote of Tony Abbott was when he just couldn't see the advantage in that first scandal that we had with the leaks of the spying scandal with Indonesia. This was a golden opportunity for Tony to just say, it wasn't us and it won't happen under us. But he took the really, really cloddish line of being loyal to the, being the old school. We don't talk about these things. Well, that was just a dumb way to handle it. I don't think Turnbull I think Turnbull won't have that sort of, binary, limitations. I think he'll be far more supple in dealing with people, the Indonesians and the Japanese and the Chinese.
This is a point.
We'll see. Yeah.
I mean, I think CNN has just done a poll on what are the qualities that Republican voters in Connecticut rate as the most important in their candidate, and the number one by absolute miles on the Republican side was business experience. And I think that's a wise judgment. And I think that's what this country needs right now. And I hope and pray that is what we are going to get.
And an interesting point of that is what Paul Sheehan said, David, earlier about will he be the point piper plutocrat and the class distinction. Malcolm has the advantage of being a multimillionaire who is adored by the Q&A ABC lefty set. So he does bridge a lot of that, which is rather interesting.
The point I want to the only analogy with the Americans is that Trump is way in front in part because he is saying he recognises how to use leverage to do a deal. And this is a kind of instinctive feel that some people have and some people don't, is to understand the leverage you have to get a commercial deal done. And this is what I want to see from Malcolm Turnbull. I want to see this respect for each individual dollar coming out of the wallet of a taxpayer, that we don't want to engage in massive uncosted, no recognition of what the benefit is. We want to have a careful respect for the taxpayer dollar before we go ahead to commit to massive big new social spending programs.
Well, we've just got a few minutes left before we do wrap up our rolling coverage, which has been underway, Peter Van Onselen, it feels like most of the day, but it has been quite a fascinating day in Australian politics, and a very rare one, and a privilege, let's be honest, to sit through it and be a part of it to the extent that we have in watching this unfold. I mean, a Liberal Prime Minister, after all that they've said about the Labor turmoil, getting rid of Gillard and then Rudd, to do this as well in their first term in government, 2 years in, Tony Abbott to be cut down. Malcolm Turnbull finally given a crack at being Prime Minister. It's an itch, I suppose, many have wanted to see scratched for a long time. What sort of Prime Minister is this figure going to be like? What is Malcolm Turnbull going to do with the job? There are still many unknowns about this. He started tonight quite well, I thought, in his press conference, and also, obviously, in the way this was all orchestrated today, with such speed, with such stealth, and zeroing in on the economic failures of the government. Well, that's now going to be the expectation, isn't it? Can he turn that around? Can he lift the government's game on the economy? Can he pick up growth as well as pick up the government's polling as well. And not long to wait to find out how he's going to go. The Canning by-election on Saturday. The polling will be coming thick and fast after that, you would imagine. Some big reform proposals the government's weighing, Malcolm Turnbull will be weighing in the months ahead on tax, on federation. So a big job ahead of him. But so far tonight, the scale of his victory, the way it's been done, it's not a bad start for him. He's got to have to heal those wounds that are there on show within the Liberal Party, and that will be the first and most important challenge. But he does seem to be off to a good start, with certainly Julie Bishop by his side. Yeah, look, he's off to a pretty good start, but this is the easy part. It only gets harder from here, David. It really does. I can't believe that this has happened. I couldn't believe that Kevin Rudd got knocked off about 2 years into his life as a first-term Prime Minister. I couldn't believe that he came back despite all the problems with Julia Gillard, simply because of how his party felt about him. Well, both of those have been upped. You know, we have Tony Abbott, of all people, after his success in opposition, getting ousted after 2 years as Prime Minister in a carbon copy, whatever others would like to say, a carbon copy, really, of what happened to Kevin Rudd, other than there being a spill motion first up, so there was a sort of a public knowledge that this was happening. Does that help? Does that make it easier for them to go forward from here? We'll find out. Who knows? And Malcolm Turnbull, of all people, the only person that I was perhaps more certain of that might not be able to come back to lead their party than Kevin Rudd, given some of the internal issues with him, was Malcolm Turnbull. Yet here he is, winning the vote, and now showing all the signs, at least rhetorically, that he's a changed man. Well, that is the key. John Howard, this is the way I'll end, David Spears, before throwing back to you to talk to others. John Howard learnt his mistakes from 89 to 95 when he came back, and John Howard was the person that counselled and told Malcolm Turnbull, don't throw the hat in after he lost the Liberal Party leadership. The only way that John Howard, having prevented Turnbull leaving, that there is any chance of Turnbull succeeding is if he now copies John Howard in the success that he had from learning from his mistakes. Well, all right. Well, Peter Van Onselen, we're going to have to wrap it up there, I'm afraid, guys. I am getting the wind up. Ross Cameron, Paul Sheehan, Janine Perrott, thank you for being with us tonight. But Peter, I know we've been on air now for the best part of 9 hours, so a big thanks to you. For those who've stuck with us throughout all of this, thank you for being with us tonight. A momentous night, as we say, in Australian politics with a new Prime Minister. We still don't have, as we near midnight, any statement from Tony Abbott about his resignation as Prime Minister. That will come, no doubt, in the morning. It still gives Malcolm Turnbull a chance to be sworn in tomorrow, but the further changes to the front bench won't come until later this week. Whether we get more resignations tomorrow, Joe Hockey or others, we shall see. A lot of behind-the-scenes talking to go on all of this, and no doubt has been underway tonight. So thank you very much for your company. Of course, we'll have extensive coverage here on Sky News throughout tomorrow as well, from First Thing with Kieran Gilbert, as we do hear from some of the key players as the dust, well, settles, I was going to say. I think there's a way to go before the dust is going to settle on this particular night in Australian politics. Thanks for your company. More news right after the break.
Pierce, I'm so glad you're here because I got a role that is perfect for you, man.
Don't tell me. Action adventure.
Sort of. All right, picture this. We open on you, driving in a beautiful car up a snowy mountain road. You're going...
200 miles an hour?
No, 30. You look up in the trees and you see...
Sniper.
No, an owl. You come around a bend, there's something blocking your way.
A missile launcher, right?
No, a moose.
A moose. What's the mission?
There is no mission.
Top secret, huh?
Yeah, sort of. So you keep going towards the summit, your destination, and there it is, a cabin.
A cabin. And it explodes.
What? No, it's just a cabin.